She built an empire with her bare hands, only to discover another woman wearing her crown inside it. Tonight, in a ballroom glittering with England's most ruthless aristocrats, Duchess Vivian Ashford will smile through the kind of humiliation that breaks weaker souls. But here's what her husband doesn't know yet. The woman he betrayed isn't planning to cry. She's planning to burn his entire world to ash. And when a woman who understands power better than mercy decides to wage war, even a duke learns what it means to lose everything. Stay with me, because what happens next will redefine what revenge looks like when executed with surgical precision.
Balladeer.
The chandelier above the Kensington Grand Ballroom held 3,000 crystals, each one worth more than most Londoners earned in a year. Vivian had counted them once during another tedious royal function where her husband's hand rested on her lower back like a brand of ownership. Tonight, she didn't bother counting. Tonight, she was too busy watching her entire life collapse with the elegant brutality only high society could orchestrate. The Royal Charity Gala hummed with the particular frequency of old money meeting new ambition. Silk gowns whispered against marble floors. Champagne flutes caught light like tiny prisons of gold. And somewhere in this beautiful, suffocating space, Adrian Blackthorne, Duke, her husband, the man she'd spent 6 years transforming from an entitled aristocrat into a financial titan, was making a fool of her. Vivian stood near this eastern colonnade, her emerald dress cut with the kind of precision that announced wealth without screaming it. Her posture was immaculate. It always was. She'd learned early that powerful men responded to women who looked like prizes, so she'd made herself into something more dangerous, a prize that could think. The Duchess of Blackthorne alone at her own husband's event. How deliciously tragic. Vivian didn't turn. She recognized the voice. Margaret Halloway, whose family fortune came from textile mills and whose personality came from sustained bitterness. The woman collected gossip the way some people collected art. Margaret, still wearing last season's jewels, I see? The other woman's smile tightened. Still pretending your marriage isn't a performance? All marriages among our kind are performances, darling. The question is who's directing. Vivian's tone could have cut glass. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see the Chancellor's wife, and unlike some people, I prefer conversations with substance. She glided away before Margaret could recover, her movements smooth despite the growing tightness in her chest. Because Margaret was right, even if the bitter old crow didn't know the specifics. Vivian's marriage was a performance, and tonight she'd just discovered she wasn't the only actress on stage. It had started 3 hours earlier in Adrian's private study at Blackthorne Manor. Vivian had been searching for the Rothschild contract, a crucial document for the shipping merger she'd been orchestrating for months. Adrian had a habit of leaving important papers scattered across his desk like a child's homework, and she'd long ago stopped asking permission to organize his chaos. She'd built half his empire from that desk. She had every right to access it. The envelope was burgundy, expensive stock, sealed with wax. It sat beneath a stack of bank statements, and she might have ignored it entirely if not for the feminine handwriting on the front. Personal correspondence wasn't unusual. Adrian received letters constantly, but something about the careful script made her pause. She shouldn't have opened it. That's what a trusting wife would tell herself. Vivian had stopped being a trusting wife approximately 4 years into her marriage, right around the time she'd realized Adrian valued her strategic mind more than her body. So she broke the seal, unfolded the letter, and read words that rewrote her entire existence. My darling Adrian, the property transfers are complete. Villa Rossi is now under my name, as discussed. I've also reviewed the Singapore accounts. Your wife's signature was convincing enough to authorize the secondary transfers. When shall I see you next? The Prague estate feels empty without you. All my love. S. Vivian read it 3 times. Not because she didn't understand. She understood perfectly. She read it 3 times because she needed those 60 seconds to decide whether to scream or to strategize, and Vivian Ashford had never been the screaming type. Villa Rossi. She'd been to Villa Rossi once, 5 years ago. Adrian had called it a business investment, a retreat property for entertaining European clients. She'd reviewed the paperwork herself, signed documents establishing it under Blackthorne Holdings. Except apparently, it wasn't under Blackthorne Holdings. It was under S's name. And S had her signature. Could forge it well enough to authorize transfers. Vivian set the letter down with steady hands. She walked to Adrian's brandy cabinet, poured herself 3 fingers of his most expensive Macallan, and drank it like medicine. Then she systematically photographed every document on his desk with her phone, returned everything to its exact position, and went upstairs to prepare for the gala. She'd applied her makeup with the same precision she used for corporate negotiations. Foundation to hide the rage, lipstick to mask the nausea, eyeshadow to distract from the murder in her eyes. By the time Adrian appeared in their bedroom doorway, already dressed in his tuxedo, she was the picture of aristocratic beauty. "You look stunning," he'd said, and his smile was warm, genuine even. That's what made it unbearable. "So do you." She'd fastened her diamond earrings, a gift from him, purchased with money she'd helped him earn, and met his eyes in the mirror. "Are we ready to perform?" He'd laughed at that, actually laughed. "Is that what you think tonight is? A performance? Isn't everything?" She turned, gracious as a Renaissance painting. "We smile for the cameras, dance for the aristocrats, and pretend we're not all just animals in expensive cages. Christ, Vivian, you're far too beautiful to be this cynical." He'd crossed to her, pressed a kiss to her temple. She'd let him, cataloging the gesture for future evidence. "Sometimes I forget how brilliant you are, how lucky I am." The words should have meant something. Once they would have. "Don't forget it too often, darling." She'd smoothed his lapel with wifely affection. "I'd hate for you to take me for granted." Now, standing in the ballroom surrounded by Britain's elite, Vivian understood that Adrian had already taken her for granted. Had probably been taking her for granted for years, while she'd been too busy building his empire to notice the foundation crumbling beneath her feet. She needed to find S, needed to see the face of the woman who'd infiltrated her life. The challenge was doing it without revealing that she knew. Vivian had learned something critical during her years in high finance. Information was only powerful if your opponent didn't know you had it. The moment Adrian suspected she'd found the letter, he'd move assets, hide evidence, prepare defenses. No, she needed to be smarter than that. "Duchess Blackthorne, how radiant you look this evening." Vivian turned to find Lord Edmund Carstairs, a banking magnate with political connections that made him more valuable than likable. His wife had died 3 years ago, and he'd been unsubtly angling for access to Vivian ever since. "Edmund, still haunting charity functions instead of doing actual charity?" He laughed, the sound rich with appreciation for her sharp tongue. "Still the only woman in London brave enough to insult me to my face. Your husband must have his hands full." "My husband," Vivian said carefully, "has his hands in many things." Something flickered in Edmund's expression. Knowledge, maybe, or calculation. "Indeed. I've heard the Blackthorne portfolio has expanded considerably. Singapore, Prague, Italy. Your strategic influence, no doubt." Prague, Italy. He knew something. Vivian sipped her champagne, playing the game. A wife supports her husband's ventures. It's tradition. Tradition. Edmund's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How quaint. Tell me, Duchess, when was the last time your husband acknowledged your contributions publicly?" It was a loaded question designed to probe for weakness in the Blackthorne marriage. Edmund was a shark, and he'd smelled blood in the water. Vivian decided to give him a taste. "Acknowledgement is such a fragile thing, Edmund. It requires the acknowledged party to feel they've earned something. My husband believes he's earned everything himself." "Ah." Edmund leaned closer, voice dropping to conspiratorial. "Then he's a fool. Everyone in our circle knows the Blackthorne fortune quadrupled after your wedding. Your financial acumen is legendary." "Legendarily unappreciated, you mean?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Vivian met his gaze directly. "But since we're speaking so frankly, tell me something. Have you ever heard of a woman named S in connection with Blackthorne Holdings?" Edmund's expression went carefully neutral. That was answer enough. "I may have encountered the name," he said slowly. "In certain financial documents. Eastern European acquisitions, if memory serves." "How interesting. Does this S have a full name?" "Duchess. I'm simply curious about my husband's business associates. Surely that's natural." Edmund studied her for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face made him decide to roll the dice. "Selina Vale, Austrian descent, I believe. She's been visible in certain aristocratic circles, Prague primarily, though I've heard rumors of London appearances." Selina Vale. The name landed in Vivian's chest like a bullet. Clean entry wound, massive internal damage. Thank you, Edmund. You've been extraordinarily helpful. Vivian. He caught her arm gently. Be careful. Men like Adrian don't surrender power gracefully. Neither, Vivian said softly, do women like me. She moved through the ballroom with purpose now, scanning faces for someone who might be Selina Vale. The name suggested elegance, continental sophistication. She'd be beautiful, obviously. Adrian had always appreciated beauty, even if he'd stopped appreciating his wife's years ago. The revelation hit her near the champagne fountain, and it wasn't about finding Selina. It was about realizing Adrian had stopped sleeping with her 18 months ago, not abruptly. That would have been obvious. No, he'd done it gradually, the way a man might slowly poison someone, missing bedtimes due to late meetings, claiming exhaustion, showing affection in ways that didn't require intimacy. She'd noticed but hadn't questioned it, assuming the passion had naturally cooled after 6 years of marriage. Stupid. She'd been so catastrophically stupid. Vivian, darling, there you are. Adrian's voice cut through her spiral. She turned to find him approaching with another couple, James Rothschild and his wife, Catherine. The Rothschilds were critical to the shipping merger. She needed to be present, charming, perfect. She forced her face into warmth. Adrian, James, Catherine, how wonderful to see you both. Catherine kissed both her cheeks in the continental fashion. You look absolutely stunning, Vivian. That dress is magnificent. You're too kind. Vivian slipped her arm through Adrian's, playing the devoted wife. His body was familiar against hers, tall, solid, commanding. She'd loved that body once, had loved the man inside it. Have you been enjoying the gala? Tremendously, James said. Your husband was just telling us about the Prague expansion. Fascinating venture. Prague. Of course he was discussing Prague. Yes, Vivian said smoothly. Adrian has been very focused on our Eastern European portfolio lately. Day and night, really. Such dedication. Adrian's arm tensed slightly under her hand. Good. Let him wonder if she knew something. Well, someone has to ensure our investments are properly managed, Adrian said, his tone light but his eyes watchful. Vivian prefers to focus on the strategic overview. The details bore her. It was a dismissal, subtle but deliberate, positioning her as the pretty figurehead while he did the real work. Catherine frowned slightly. Really? I'd heard the Duchess was instrumental in the Singapore acquisition. Everyone says she has a brilliant financial mind. Oh, she does, Adrian agreed, but his smile had edges now. When she chooses to apply it. Though lately she's been more interested in charity work. Isn't that right, darling? The lie was breathtaking. Vivian had been working 16-hour days on the Rothschild merger alone, not to mention managing 3 other corporate negotiations simultaneously. But Adrian was rewriting history right in front of witnesses, crediting himself with her accomplishments. She could have exposed him, could have listed every deal she'd closed, every contract she'd negotiated, every million she'd generated while he played Duke at social functions. Instead, she smiled. I do enjoy giving back to the community, though of course, I always make time for family business when Adrian needs my assistance. The pause before assistance was deliberate. James caught it, his expression shifting with interest. Well, Catherine said brightly, sensing tension, we should let you two circulate, but we must have dinner soon. I want to hear all about your Prague properties. The architecture there is supposed to be stunning. Indeed it is, Adrian said warmly. Perhaps we'll host you there sometime. Our villa is quite beautiful. Our villa? He'd just claimed Selina Vale's property as theirs. After the Rothschilds departed, Adrian's grip on Vivian's arm tightened. What was that? What was what? She blinked up at him innocently. That comment about assistance. I made it sound like I assist you, which I do, constantly. She extracted herself from his grip with practiced grace. Is there something wrong with acknowledging my contributions, Adrian? Or would you prefer I pretend to be the empty-headed trophy wife? Don't be ridiculous. I've never treated you like a trophy. No, you've treated me like an unpaid executive while taking credit for my work, which is somehow worse. His jaw tightened. We're in public. Then perhaps you should have thought twice before dismissing my accomplishments in front of the Rothschilds. She kept her voice low, venomous. Or did you forget I'm the one who structured that entire merger? That James Rothschild trusts me more than he trusts you? Vivian, I'm going to powder my room. Do try not to claim credit for my dress while I'm gone. She walked away before he could respond, her heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of suppressed rage. She needed space, needed air, needed to think. The ladies' lounge was blissfully empty, all gilt mirrors and velvet settees designed for aristocratic women to repair their facades. Vivian stood at the sink, staring at her reflection. She looked composed, elegant, absolutely in control. She looked like a woman who had no idea her life was a carefully constructed lie. The door opened behind her. Vivian didn't turn, assuming another guest, until she caught the reflection in the mirror. The woman was extraordinary. Dark hair swept into an effortless chignon, cheekbones that could cut glass, wearing a black gown that probably cost more than a car. She was younger than Vivian by maybe 5 years, with the kind of continental beauty that suggested European aristocracy. And she was staring at Vivian with barely concealed triumph. Duchess Blackthorne. The accent was subtle, Austrian, overlaid with British boarding school. What a pleasure to finally meet you properly. Vivian's blood turned to ice. I'm sorry, have we met? Not formally, but I feel I know you quite well. The woman extended a manicured hand. Selina Vale. I'm a business associate of your husband's. Time seemed to crystallize. This was the woman. The one who'd infiltrated her empire, forged her signature, slept in beds purchased with Blackthorne money. And she had the audacity to introduce herself at a royal gala. Vivian took her hand, squeezed with just enough pressure to make a point. Selina, how fascinating. Adrian has never mentioned you, hasn't he? Selina's smile was feline. How unlike him. We've been working together quite closely for, nearly 3 years now. The Prague acquisition, the Italian properties, several Asian ventures. I'm surprised he's kept our partnership so quiet. Partnership. The word choice was deliberate, designed to wound. Vivian released her hand, turned back to the mirror, and calmly reapplied her lipstick. My husband works with many people. I can't be expected to remember every employee's name. The barb landed. Selina's expression hardened. Employee? Oh, Duchess, I'm far more than an employee. I'm Adrian's strategic partner. In fact, some might say I'm the one who's helped him achieve his recent success. While you've been playing Lady of the Manor, I've been building the real empire. Vivian capped her lipstick with a decisive click. Is that what Adrian tells you? That you're building an empire? She turned, leaning casually against the marble counter. How sweet. Tell me, does he also tell you that every deal you've touched was structured with my strategy? That the Singapore acquisition you're so proud of was based on a framework I developed 18 months ago? Or does he let you believe you're brilliant while using my blueprints? Selina's confidence wavered, just slightly, but Vivian saw it. You're lying. Am I? Check the documents, darling. My signature isn't just on the final papers. It's in the margins of every preliminary contract, every risk assessment, every financial projection. Adrian may fuck you, but he still needs my brain. Vivian smiled, cold and beautiful. So when you're celebrating your little victories in Prague, remember, you're living in a house I designed, spending money I generated, playing a role I created. You bitter, pathetic... Choose your next words carefully, Vivian interrupted, her voice dropping to lethal calm. Because I'm giving you one chance to walk away from this conversation without consequences. Insult me again, and I promise you'll discover exactly how pathetic I'm not. Selina stepped closer, invading Vivian's space. You think you're frightening? You're a duchess playing at business, living off a title you married into. Adrian knows what you are, a pretty face with delusions of competence. Why do you think he turned to me? Because he's a coward who can't handle a woman smarter than him, Vivian said flatly. And you're a vulture who saw an opportunity to attach yourself to power you could never generate alone. She pushed off the counter, standing at her full height. But here's what you haven't realized yet. Adrian didn't build this empire. I did. And everything you think you've taken from me, I can take back in a heartbeat. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Vivian collected her clutch, preparing to leave. Enjoy your moment, Selina. Savor it. Because the moment I decide to destroy you, you'll disappear so completely even Adrian won't remember your name. She was at the door when Selina's voice stopped her. He loves me, not you. He hasn't loved you in years. Vivian paused, hand on the doorframe. The words should have hurt, should have broken something inside her. Instead, she felt nothing, just cold, crystalline clarity. Love, she said without turning, is irrelevant. Power is what matters, and you're about to learn the difference between borrowed power and earned power. She glanced back over her shoulder, her smile razor sharp. See you at the bankruptcy hearings, darling. She left Selina standing in the lounge, walked back into the ballroom, and immediately began identifying targets. Edmund Carstairs was first. She found him near the orchestra, chatting with a German industrialist. Edmund, a moment? She smiled apologetically at the German. Business, I'm afraid. They moved to a quiet corner. Vivian wasted no time. I need information on every asset my husband controls outside Blackthorn Holdings. Personal properties, shell corporations, anything registered under alternative names. Can you do that? Edmund's eyebrows rose. That's quite a request. I'll make it worth your while. I'm restructuring my personal portfolio. There will be opportunities for investors who provide value. I see. He studied her carefully. This is about the Veil woman, isn't it? This is about protecting my interests. Are you in or not? I'm in. Give me 48 hours. 24. I'll pay double your usual fee. He nodded slowly. You're going to war with your husband. No, Vivian corrected. I'm going to win a war he doesn't know he's already lost. Her next stop was Catherine Rothschild, who was examining the silent auction items with studied disinterest. Catherine, do you have a moment? They walked toward the terrace, away from listening ears. I need a favor, Vivian said quietly. The Rothschild merger. I need you to structure it so final approval requires my signature, not Adrian's. Catherine's surprise was evident. Vivian, that's highly irregular. Adrian is the Duke. Legally, he controls. Legally, I'm a co-signatory on Blackthorn Holdings, and I'm the one who structured this entire deal. James knows that. I need you to explain to your husband that without my involvement, this merger doesn't happen. She softened her tone. Please. As one woman to another, I'm asking for protection against something I hope I never need. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. He's been unfaithful. Worse, he's been compromised, and I can't let his mistakes destroy what I've built. Catherine touched her arm gently. I'll talk to James tonight. Consider it done. 2 allies in 30 minutes. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Vivian spent the next hour working the room like a general recruiting soldiers. She dropped careful hints to 3 board members about financial irregularities requiring investigation. She mentioned to Lady Morrison, a notorious gossip with political connections, that certain Blackthorn properties might be vulnerable to regulatory scrutiny. She planted seeds of doubt in a dozen conversations, each one designed to bloom into chaos later. By the time Adrian found her again, she'd laid groundwork for a siege. There you are. We need to talk. Not here, Adrian. Too many witnesses to whatever you're about to say. His grip on her elbow was firm as he guided her toward a private anteroom. The moment the door closed, his composure cracked. What the hell was that display with the Rothschilds? You made me look incompetent. I made you look like what you are, a man taking credit for someone else's work. That's not fair. We're a team. Teams share credit. You've spent 6 years accepting praise for my accomplishments while treating me like an assistant. She crossed her arms. So forgive me if I'm done playing supportive wife while you bask in glory I generated. This is about more than credit. Adrian stepped closer, his expression hardening. You're angry. I understand that. But undermining me in front of our allies is unacceptable. You want to talk about unacceptable? Let's discuss Prague. She watched him freeze, watched fear flash across his aristocratic features before he locked it down. What about Prague? Villa Rossi? Selina Vale? The accounts you've been hiding under forged signatures. She tilted her head. Should I continue, or shall we stop pretending? His face went white, then red. You've been going through my private correspondence. Your private correspondence was sitting on a desk I use daily for Blackthorn business. If you wanted privacy, you should have been smarter about hiding your mistress. Selina isn't... Don't you dare lie to me right now. Vivian's voice cracked like a whip. I met her. Tonight. She introduced herself, actually. Quite bold, considering she's been stealing my money and forging my signature for 3 years. Adrian had the decency to look stricken. Vivian, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been fucking her in houses I helped pay for? That you've been transferring assets with my forged signature? That you've been letting her pretend to be your business partner while I do the actual work? She laughed, bitter and sharp. Please, Adrian, explain how any of that is acceptable. It's not what you think. Then what is it? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and guilt warring on his face. Selena, she helped me when things were difficult. When you were so focused on the business, you barely noticed I existed. So this is my fault? I worked too hard building your empire, so you decided to cheat? It wasn't about cheating. It was about feeling valued, appreciated. She made me feel like a man? Vivian finished acidly. Let me guess. She's impressed by your title, thinks you're brilliant, doesn't challenge you the way I do. His silence was answer enough. Christ, Adrian, you threw away a partnership with someone who actually made you powerful for a woman who makes you feel powerful. Do you understand how pathetic that is? You don't get to judge me. You've been cold for years, distant, more interested in balance sheets than your husband, because I was busy saving your family legacy. Her voice rose despite herself. Your estates were drowning in debt when we married. Your title was meaningless. I turned you into someone important, and this is how you repay me? I never asked you to do that. The words hung between them, brutal in their honesty. Vivian felt something inside her shatter and reform, harder than before. You're right, she said quietly. You never asked. You just accepted. Took everything I offered and decided it wasn't enough. She moved toward the door. Well, now you're going to learn what enough actually costs. Vivian, wait. We're done talking. If you want to discuss this further, you can speak to my lawyers. Your lawyers? What are you fit? I'm protecting my interests, something I should have done years ago. She paused at the threshold. Oh, and Adrian? The Rothschild merger now requires my approval. Catherine was very understanding when I explained that you've been compromised by a foreign asset. His face went purple with rage. You can't do that. I'm the Duke. Legally, you control nothing without my cooperation. I made sure of that when I restructured Blackthorn Holdings 3 years ago. Remember? You were too busy with Selena to read the fine print. She smiled, cold as winter. Sweet dreams, darling. I hope she was worth it. She left him standing there, returned to the ballroom, and made polite conversation for another excruciating hour. She danced with Lord Carrington, laughed at Ambassador Wells's terrible jokes, and accepted compliments on her dress with gracious warmth. Nobody watching would have suspected that beneath her elegant exterior, Vivian Ashford was planning the systematic destruction of everything her husband valued. The car ride home was silent. Adrian drove with white knuckles, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Vivian gazed out the window, watching London blur past in streaks of gold and shadow. Blackthorn Manor loomed ahead, all Gothic grandeur and inherited arrogance. Vivian had loved this house once, had imagined raising children here, growing old with Adrian in rooms filled with history and hope. Now it just looked like an elaborate cage. They entered through the main hall, their footsteps echoing on marble. Vivian? Adrian caught her wrist. Please, can we talk about this rationally? She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. Rationally? You've been committing fraud with my forged signature, and you want rational discussion? I'll fix it. I'll transfer everything back. We can make this right. Can we? She pulled free of his grip. Can you unfuck Selena? Can you undo 3 years of betrayal? Can you give me back the marriage I thought I had? You know I can't. Then what exactly are you offering? He looked desperate now, a cornered animal. A chance to save what we have. I know I've made mistakes, but we can rebuild. We're stronger than this. We're not anything anymore, Adrian. You destroyed us the moment you chose her. I didn't choose her. I love you. The words should have mattered. Once, they would have been everything. Now they were just noise. Love without respect is worthless. Love without loyalty is worse than hatred. Vivian started up the stairs. I'm sleeping in the guest wing tonight. Don't follow me. This is my house. She paused midway up the staircase, looking down at him like a queen addressing a peasant. This is my empire. You're just the figurehead I've been propping up. And when I'm done dismantling your life piece by piece, you'll finally understand the difference." She continued upward, leaving Adrian standing alone in the hall of his ancestral home, surrounded by portraits of dead dukes who'd probably been just as foolish. In the guest suite, Vivian locked the door, removed her jewelry with mechanical precision, and sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were steady, her breathing was controlled. She wasn't crying. She'd already decided tears were a waste of water that could be better used drowning her enemies. Instead, she opened her laptop and began documenting everything. Every forged signature, every hidden account, every property transferred under suspicious circumstances. She pulled up financial records going back 5 years, cross-referencing Adrian's claims against actual transactions. The fraud was extensive. Selena hadn't just taken Villa Rossi, she'd systematically siphoned money from multiple Blackthorn accounts, always small enough amounts to avoid immediate detection. The Singapore transfers referenced in her letter had moved nearly £3 million into offshore accounts, and Adrian had let it happen. Possibly helped it happen. Vivian worked through the night, building a case that would destroy both of them. By dawn, she had enough evidence to trigger criminal investigations, seize assets, and dismantle Adrian's reputation completely. But criminal charges were too quick, too clean. No, Vivian wanted Adrian to suffer the way she was suffering. Wanted him to watch everything he valued crumble slowly, piece by piece, until he understood what it meant to lose everything at the hands of someone you'd underestimated. She wanted him ruined, broken, alone, and she knew exactly how to make it happen. At 7 a.m., her phone rang. Edmund Carstairs. "I have your information. You're not going to like it." "Tell me." He rattled off a list that made her stomach turn. Properties in Prague, Vienna, Singapore, shell corporations in the Caymans, accounts under Selena's name but funded with Blackthorn money. Investments Adrian had made without board approval, risking company stability for personal ventures. "How much total?" Vivian asked. "Conservatively? £40 million, possibly more if the Prague estimates are accurate." 40 million. Enough to fund hospitals, schools, genuine charity. Instead, Adrian had spent it building a shadow empire for his mistress. "Thank you, Edmund. Send me everything, encrypted." "Vivian, what are you planning?" "Justice," she said simply, "and a hostile takeover." She hung up, opened a new document, and began drafting her strategy. It would take months, maybe a year. But when she was finished, Adrian Blackthorn would have nothing. No empire, no title that mattered, no respect, just like he'd left her with nothing but betrayal and beautiful lies. Vivian stared out at Blackthorn Manor's grounds, watching dawn break over landscaping she'd funded with her financial genius. The gardens had cost £200,000 to restore. Adrian had taken credit for them in Architectural Digest, never once mentioning his wife's vision. That was going to change. Everything was going to change. Because Vivian Ashford had finally learned the most important lesson of her life. Power didn't come from being loved or valued or appreciated. Power came from being willing to burn down the world when someone tried to take what you'd built. And Adrian had just handed her the matches. The sun came up over Blackthorn Manor like an indictment, all harsh light and no mercy. Vivian hadn't slept. Sleep was a luxury for people who still believed their lives made sense, and she'd stopped believing that around 3 a.m. when she'd finished cataloging the 47th fraudulent transaction bearing her forged signature. Her laptop screen glowed with evidence that could destroy Adrian in court: criminal fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. The kind of charges that didn't just end careers, they ended legacies. 3 centuries of Blackthorn aristocracy reduced to a scandal that would make the tabloids salivate for months. But Vivian closed the laptop without sending anything to authorities. Because prison was too easy. Prison meant Adrian could play the repentant husband, the flawed man who'd made mistakes. Society would sympathize with the Duke behind bars. They'd whisper about his wife's cruelty, her vindictiveness. She'd become the villain in a story where she was the victim. No. If Vivian was going to destroy Adrian, she needed to do it the way empires actually fell, slowly, publicly, with enough time for everyone to watch him realize he'd destroyed himself. She showered in the guest suite, dressed in a charcoal suit that meant business, and was halfway down the stairs when she heard voices from the dining room, Adrian's voice, low and urgent, and another voice she recognized with a spike of pure rage. Selina Vale was in her house. Vivian paused outside the doorway, listening. The instinct was beneath her, eavesdropping in her own home. But information was currency, and she was suddenly very poor in knowledge about what Adrian was planning. You said she didn't know. Selina's accent was thicker now, stress cracking her polished English. You promised me she was oblivious. She found a letter. I don't know how, but she knows about Prague, the accounts, everything. Adrian sounded wrecked, his aristocratic composure shattered. She's threatening lawyers. Lawyers? Adrian, if she involves lawyers, they'll find the Singapore transfers, the Vienna properties, everything we've built. Oh, everything you've built with my wife's money, you mean? Silence. Then Selina's voice, colder now. Our agreement was that you'd handle her, keep her focused on the small deals while we positioned the real assets. You said she trusted you. She did trust me. She doesn't anymore. Then make her trust you again. Or better yet, make her go away. The words landed like a physical blow. Make her go away. As if Vivian were an obstacle to be removed rather than the architect of everything they'd stolen. I'm not divorcing her, Adrian said firmly. The scandal would destroy the family name. I'm not talking about divorce. Another silence, longer this time. Vivian's hand tightened on the doorframe, nails digging into wood. What exactly are you suggesting? Adrian's voice had dropped to something dangerous. I'm suggesting that women like Vivian have accidents. Tragic accidents that leave grieving husbands and significant life insurance payouts. Vivian stopped breathing. Selina wasn't just a mistress. She was something worse. A predator who'd identified Adrian's weakness and was pushing him towards something unforgivable. You're insane. Adrian's chair scraped back. I'm not killing my wife. Not you personally, but there are people who handle these things discreetly. Selina's footsteps moved closer to where Adrian stood. Think about it. A car accident. A break-in gone wrong. She's been so stressed lately, maybe she takes too many pills one night. Any of these things could happen to a woman under enormous pressure. Get out. Adrian, I said get out. Now. Before I call security and have you removed from my property. Footsteps approaching the door. Vivian moved quickly, slipping into the adjacent study, pressing herself against the wall as Selina strode past, her heels clicking with frustrated violence. The front door opened and slammed hard enough to rattle the chandelier. Vivian waited 30 seconds, controlling her breathing, before walking into the dining room. Adrian stood by the window, his back to the door, shoulders rigid with tension. He didn't turn when she entered. How much did you hear? Enough. Vivian poured herself coffee from the sideboard, her hand steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her system. Your mistress just suggested murdering me. I assume that violates some kind of relationship boundary. He spun to face her, his expression stricken. Vivian, I would never... Never what? Never let your mistress plan my death in our dining room? Never consider that substantial life insurance payout? She sipped her coffee, bitter and black. I'm curious where your moral line actually is, Adrian. You'll commit fraud and adultery, but murder is a step too far? Don't twist this. I told her no. You told her no today. What happens next week when I freeze your accounts? Next month when I start dismantling your board? How long before her suggestion starts sounding reasonable? I'm not a killer. You're a coward, which is almost worse. Killers at least own their violence. You just enable other people to do your damage. She set down her cup with deliberate care. But thank you for the warning. Now I know exactly how dangerous this situation is. Where are you going? He moved to block the doorway as she headed for the exit. To hire security, since apparently I need protection from my own husband's associates. Vivian, please, can we just talk about this rationally? Rational? She laughed, sharp and humorless. Your mistress threatened my life 20 minutes ago, and you want rational discussion? Here's rational. I'm moving my personal assets into accounts you can't touch. I'm hiring lawyers who specialize in corporate fraud. And I'm making sure that if anything happens to me, anything at all, evidence of every illegal transaction you've made gets delivered directly to the Financial Conduct Authority. His face went white. You wouldn't. Test me. Take Selina's advice. Have an accident arranged, see what happens. She stepped closer, invading his space with the same aggressive intimacy he'd used on her for years. Because I've already written a letter detailing everything. It's with my solicitor. If I die, if I'm injured, if I disappear, It gets opened, and you spend the rest of your life in prison while Selena spends your money. You're bluffing. Am I? You've underestimated me for 6 years. Do you really want to keep making that mistake? She pushed past him, grabbed her bag from the entry hall, and walked out of Blackthorn Manor without looking back. The moment she was in her car, hands locked on the steering wheel, the shaking started. Not fear. She'd processed fear somewhere between hearing murder discussed and pouring coffee, but pure rage so intense her vision blurred. Selena Vale had suggested killing her, casually, like ordering a particularly difficult piece of furniture removed. And Adrian had said no, but he'd said it the way weak men said no, with just enough hesitation to suggest the answer might change under pressure. Vivian drove to central London on autopilot, her mind already 3 moves ahead. She needed allies, real ones, not social acquaintances who'd abandon her the moment scandal touched the Blackthorn name. She needed people with their own power, their own reasons to want Adrian diminished. She made 4 calls from the car. First, to Catherine Rothschild. I need that merger restructured immediately, not in a week, today. Catherine's concern was immediate. Vivian, what happened? Something that makes my request no longer optional. Can you do it? James won't be happy about the rush. James can be unhappy, or he can lose the most profitable merger of his career because my husband's criminal activities trigger regulatory seizures. His choice. I'll handle it. But Vivian, are you safe? The question landed with unexpected weight. Vivian had spent so long being the powerful Duchess that people forgot powerful women could still be vulnerable. Not as safe as I need to be, which is why I'm fixing that today. Second call went to Edmund Carstairs. I need an introduction to your security consultant, the one you used during the hostile takeover last year. That's serious protection, Vivian. Military background, very expensive. How expensive? He named a figure that would have made her hesitate a week ago. Now it seemed like the best investment she'd ever make. Set up a meeting. Today. Third call was to her personal solicitor, Marcus Webb. I need a dead man's switch established immediately. If anything happens to me, a sealed package gets delivered to the FCA, the Serious Fraud Office, and every major newspaper in London. What kind of package? Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. Evidence of systematic fraud involving Blackthorn Holdings and several offshore accounts. I'll deliver the physical documents this afternoon. Vivian, if you're in danger, I'm in danger of being underestimated one more time, not anymore. The fourth call she made to someone she'd hoped never to involve. Her younger brother, Thomas. He lived in Singapore, ran a tech security firm, and had spent years working in corporate intelligence before going legitimate. Viv, Christ, what time is it there? Late enough that I need your help. She heard him sit up, instantly alert. What happened? I need you to hack Adrian's communications, everything. Emails, phone records, encrypted messaging apps. Can you do it? Legally or illegally, whichever gets results. Thomas was quiet for a moment. This is about his affair. This is about his affair, his fraud, and his mistress suggesting I have an accident. So yes, this is about considerably more than infidelity. Fuck. Okay, I'm on the next flight to London. You don't have to... Oh, someone threatened my sister's life. I'm coming. Send me his phone number and email addresses. I'll start remote access before I land. She gave him the information, feeling something unclench in her chest. Thomas was family in the way Adrian had stopped being, someone who'd protect her without calculating the cost. By the time she reached her lawyer's office in Mayfair, Vivian had the skeleton of a plan forming. It was brutal, comprehensive, and would take months to execute properly. But when she was finished, Adrian wouldn't just lose his empire. He'd lose the respect that made aristocracy mean anything. Marcus Webb's office overlooked Hyde Park, all mahogany and inherited privilege. He'd been the Ashford family solicitor for 20 years, which meant he knew exactly what kind of woman Vivian had been before she married. Intelligent, ambitious, too clever for her own good. He stood when she entered, concern etched into his patrician features. Vivian, you look like you haven't slept. I've been busy documenting my husband's crimes. She handed him a USB drive. Everything on here gets stored in multiple secure locations. If I die, disappear, or suffer a convenient accident, it all goes public. Marcus took the drive with careful hands. You're serious about the danger. His mistress suggested murder. He said no. But he didn't say never. She met his eyes. I need you to understand something, Marcus. I'm not asking you to help me divorce Adrian. I'm asking you to help me destroy him so completely that he'll wish I just filed for divorce. That's a dangerous game. So is trusting a man who's already betrayed you. I'm done playing safe. They spent 2 hours building legal frameworks for protection, restraining orders if Adrian became aggressive, asset freezes if he tried to hide money, court motions that could be filed instantly if circumstances required. Marcus worked with the grim efficiency of someone who knew exactly how ugly aristocratic divorces could become. One more thing, Vivian said as she prepared to leave. I need a private investigator, someone who can track Selena Vale's movements without being detected. I know someone, former MI5, very good at disappearing into backgrounds. Hire them. I want to know everywhere she goes, everyone she talks to, every transaction she makes. Vivian, Marcus hesitated. This is going to get very ugly very quickly. Are you prepared for that? She thought about Adrian's face when he'd begged her to be rational. Thought about Selena's casual cruelty, discussing murder like redecorating. Thought about 6 years of building an empire only to discover she'd been building someone else's fortune. I've spent 6 years being prepared for everything except betrayal, she said quietly. Now I'm just prepared. The security consultant Edmund had recommended was named James Keller, and he looked like someone who'd forgotten how to smile somewhere around his 3rd combat tour. They met at a private club in Belgravia, the kind of place where discretion was more valuable than membership. Keller listened to Vivian's situation without interrupting, taking notes on a leather pad with economical handwriting. You need personal security, electronic surveillance detection, and travel protocol implementation, he said when she finished. Standard high-risk executive package, but modified for domestic threat. Can you do it? I can do it. Question is whether you're ready for what it means. Which is, you'll have someone with you constantly. Every room in your residence swept for listening devices daily. Your car, your phone, your computer, all monitored for tampering. Your movements logged and verified. It's invasive, expensive, and necessary if the threat level is what you've described. Vivian thought about living like a prisoner in her own life. Then she thought about Selena's voice suggesting accidents. When can you start? Today. I'll have a team at Blackthorn Manor within 2 hours. I'm not returning to Blackthorn Manor. I'll be staying at my family's townhouse in Knightsbridge. Keller nodded. Even better, smaller footprint, easier to secure. I'll need keys, alarm codes, and a list of everyone authorized to enter. It'll be a very short list. She gave him the information, signed contracts that cost more than luxury cars, and felt something like safety beginning to assemble around her exposed edges. By late afternoon, Vivian was installed in the Ashford townhouse, a 4-story Georgian building her parents had bought decades ago and left her in their will. She'd barely used it during her marriage, preferring to play Duchess at the manor. Now it felt like a fortress. Keller's team swept the building, found 3 listening devices that made Vivian's blood run cold, and installed security that would have impressed military installations. The bugs were recent, Keller told her, showing her the small devices, probably planted within the last week. Adrian's been monitoring me. Or someone working for him. Either way, assume he knows you came here. The good news is we've now secured your perimeter. No one's listening anymore. Vivian stared at the tiny devices, thinking about how many private conversations Adrian had heard, how many planning sessions for his own destruction he'd monitored. Can you trace where the signal was going? Already did. IP address traces back to a residence in Prague. Selena. Of course. The mistress had been tracking Vivian's movements, listening to her conversations, building intelligence like they were at war, which, Vivian supposed, they were. Her phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Rothschild. Merger restructured. Your signature now required for final approval. James is furious but contained. C. Victory. Small, but significant. Adrian no longer controlled the Rothschild deal without her cooperation. The second text came from Thomas. Landed in London. On my way to you. Don't drink anything Adrian gives you. T. She smiled despite everything. Her brother's paranoia was suddenly looking very reasonable. Thomas arrived at 8 p.m., looking travel-worn and dangerous. He'd brought his laptop and something that looked like a small portable server. Show me everything, he said, not bothering with greetings. They sat in the secured study. Keller had confirmed no listening devices. and Vivian walked him through 6 years of marriage, betrayal, and systematic fraud. Thomas listened like he was conducting a military briefing, occasionally stopping her to ask technical questions. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Adrian's an idiot. I'm aware. No, I mean, he's a genuine idiot. You don't commit financial fraud with digital trails if you have any brains at all. He kept everything, every email, every text, every transaction logged. Thomas opened his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. I've been in his accounts for 6 hours. It's like he wanted to get caught. Or he never thought anyone would look. Which brings us back to idiot. Thomas pulled up screen after screen of evidence. Here's Adrian discussing asset transfers with Selena. Here's them planning property purchases using forged documents. Here's, Jesus, Viv, there's a whole email thread about minimizing your involvement in board decisions. They wanted me pushed out. They wanted you erased. Look at this one from Selena. The Duchess is becoming problematic. We need to consolidate control before she realizes how much leverage she has. The word stung, even though Vivian had expected something like them. Seeing it written out made it real. When was that sent? 8 months ago, right around when you were finalizing the Singapore acquisition. Thomas scrolled further. And here's Adrian's response. Vivian won't be a problem. She thinks she's irreplaceable, but I've been managing these deals alone for years. Alone. As if Vivian's strategy, her negotiations, her financial genius were irrelevant. As if Adrian had built the empire himself while she'd just watched. Forward me everything, Vivian said quietly. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence. Already done. But Viv, we need to talk about what you're planning. What I'm planning is to destroy him. I got that part. I mean legally. This evidence could send Adrian to prison. Selena too. You could hand it to authorities and be done. Prison is too kind. Thomas studied her face. You want him to suffer. I want him to lose everything the way I lost everything. His reputation, his power, his belief that he's untouchable. I want him broken in ways that criminal conviction doesn't accomplish. That's going to take time, and he's going to fight back. Let him fight. I've spent 6 years building his empire. I know every weakness, every vulnerability, every relationship that props him up. He's going to learn what it means to be at war with someone who knows exactly where the foundations are cracked. Thomas nodded slowly. Okay, then let's build a real plan. They worked through the night, constructing a strategy that was part corporate warfare, part psychological demolition. Thomas would continue monitoring Adrian's communications, tracking his movements, building a comprehensive picture of his activities. Vivian would systematically dismantle his business relationships, turning allies against him with carefully deployed evidence of his corruption. The key is timing, Thomas said around midnight. You can't hit him all at once. It needs to feel like the walls are slowly closing in. I want him paranoid, desperate, making mistakes. Then we start small, undermine his credibility with the board, plant doubts about his judgment, let him defend himself repeatedly until people stop believing his defenses. It was vicious, calculated, exactly what Vivian needed. By 2 a.m., they'd outlined a 6-month campaign that would leave Adrian isolated, discredited, and financially devastated. The beauty of it was that most of it would be perfectly legal, just aggressive business tactics deployed against someone who'd already committed crimes. There's one problem, Thomas said. Selena. She's not going to just disappear quietly. I know, she's the accelerant. If Adrian's the house fire, she's the gasoline, which means she's also the biggest risk. If she panics, she might do something drastic. Vivian thought about the casual way Selena had discussed murder, about the listening devices in her townhouse, about 6 years of infiltration and theft. Then we make sure she has reasons to panic. Often. Until she makes a mistake we can use. Thomas looked at his sister with something like awe. You've changed. The Vivian I remember wouldn't have been this ruthless. The Vivian you remember hadn't been betrayed by someone she rebuilt from aristocratic rubble. People change when they learn their entire life was a lie. Fair enough. So when do we start? Tomorrow. I'm calling an emergency board meeting at Blackthorn Holdings. Adrian won't know about it until he arrives. The emergency board meeting convened at 9 a.m. in the company's executive boardroom. Vivian had used her co-signatory status to authorize it, knowing Adrian would be blindsided. She'd deliberately scheduled it to conflict with his usual Thursday golf session with political allies. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table when Adrian burst through the door 20 minutes late, still wearing his golf attire under a hastily donned jacket. "What the hell is this?" His face was red with anger and embarrassment. "I wasn't informed about any meeting." "You were informed 3 hours ago via company protocol," Vivian said calmly from her position at the head of the table. "Perhaps check your email more frequently." "I'm the chairman. I call board meetings, not you." "Actually," interjected Marcus Webb, Vivian had invited him as corporate counsel, "the Duchess has equal authority to convene emergency sessions under the Articles of Incorporation you signed 3 years ago. Perhaps you should review those documents." Adrian looked ready to explode, but the presence of board members forced him into a seat. "Fine. What's this about?" Vivian stood, activating the presentation screen behind her. "This meeting concerns financial irregularities that require board attention and potential regulatory disclosure." She watched Adrian's face drain of color as the first slide appeared, a timeline of property transfers to offshore entities. Over the past 3 years, Blackthorn Holdings has transferred approximately £40 million in assets to shell corporations without proper board approval. These transactions were authorized using forged signatory documents. "That's insane," Adrian interrupted. "We haven't... Please hold your objections until I finish the presentation." Vivian's voice could have frozen oceans. As documented here, these transfers coincide with the acquisition of properties in Prague, Vienna, and Singapore, properties that are officially registered to a Selina Vale, an Austrian national with no disclosed relationship to Blackthorn Holdings. Murmuring around the table, board members exchanging glances. Peter Thornton, the CFO, looked particularly concerned. "I'm sure there's an explanation," Adrian said, but his voice had lost its authority. "I'm sure there is, which is why I'm recommending we engage external auditors to investigate these transactions and determine whether we have exposure to fraud liability." "Fraud? You're accusing me of fraud in front of the board?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm noting discrepancies that require investigation. Unless you'd prefer I take this directly to the Financial Conduct Authority without giving you opportunity to explain?" The threat hung in the air. Adrian looked trapped, his aristocratic certainty crumbling. "How long have you known about this?" asked Janet Morrison, a board member with banking experience. "I discovered the discrepancies this week. I felt it was my duty to bring them to the board immediately, rather than handle them privately." Translation: "I could have destroyed you quietly, Adrian, but I chose public humiliation instead." Peter Thornton cleared his throat. "I'll need to see the supporting documentation. If these transfers occurred without proper authorization, we have serious compliance issues. I've prepared comprehensive files for your review. Marcus will distribute them." The meeting continued for 2 hours. Vivian presented evidence with surgical precision, while Adrian floundered, trying to defend transactions he hadn't realized she'd documented. By the end, the board had voted to suspend all executive transfers pending external audit and to require dual authorization, Vivian's and Adrian's, for any transaction over £1 million. Adrian had lost operational control of his own company. As board members filed out, several stopped to speak with Vivian privately. Caroline Stevens, who controlled significant voting shares, pulled her aside. "That was brutal, necessary, but brutal. I take no pleasure in it." "Don't you?" Caroline's smile was knowing. "You just neutered your husband in front of his entire board. If that wasn't pleasurable, you're a better actor than I thought." Vivian didn't deny it. "He made choices. I'm just ensuring those choices have consequences." "Well, you have my support. Adrian's been arrogant for years. Someone needed to check him." One by one, board members aligned themselves with Vivian, not out of loyalty to her, but out of self-preservation. She represented competence and control. Adrian represented liability and scandal. By the time the room cleared, only Adrian remained, slumped in his chair like a broken marionette. "You enjoyed that?" "No," Vivian said honestly. "I hated every second, but I'd hate being complicit in your fraud more." "This is your revenge, for Selina. This is me protecting the company from your criminal negligence. The fact that it humiliates you is just collateral benefit." He looked up at her, and for a moment she saw something like understanding in his eyes. "You're going to destroy me completely, aren't you?" "Yes." "Why? Why not just divorce me and take half?" Because half isn't justice. Half is what I'd get if you were just a bad husband. You're a criminal who used my genius to build a fortune while crediting yourself. You let your mistress forge my signature and steal company assets. You stood by while she suggested murdering me. Vivian leaned against the table, studying him like a particularly interesting insect. So, no, Adrian, I'm not taking half. I'm taking everything. And when I'm done, you'll understand exactly what you destroyed when you betrayed me. She walked out of the boardroom, leaving him alone with the wreckage of his authority. Outside, Thomas was waiting in the car. How'd it go? Better than expected. The board voted to suspend his transfer authority. First blood. How do you feel? Vivian considered the question. She felt powerful, vindicated, terrified, exhausted. Like I just started a war I can't afford to lose. Then we make sure you win. Thomas pulled into traffic. I've got movement on Selena. She's been making encrypted calls to Prague. Sounds panicked. Good. Panic makes people sloppy. It also makes them dangerous. My contact says she's been researching, well, you. Researching what about me? Your schedule, your security, places you go regularly. Thomas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Viv, I think she's looking for vulnerabilities. The implication was clear. Selena hadn't abandoned her murder plans. She'd just gone underground with them. Double my security, Vivian said quietly. And Thomas? Start looking into Selena's background. Everyone has something they're hiding. Find hers. That night, Vivian stood in the Ashford townhouse's study, looking out over London's glittering skyline. Somewhere in that sprawl of light and shadow, Adrian was dealing with the consequences of their board meeting. Somewhere else, Selena was planning her next move. And Vivian was standing in the center of a war she'd never wanted, but would finish on her terms. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello? Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a woman's voice, tight with rage. You think you've won something today. You haven't. You've just made everything worse. Selena. I'm sorry. Who is this? Vivian kept her voice perfectly neutral. Don't play games. Adrian told me about the board meeting, your little power play. If you're referring to my responsibility as a board member to report financial irregularities, I'm simply doing my duty. Your duty? Selena's laugh was harsh. Your duty is to disappear quietly and let Adrian move on with someone who actually appreciates him. Someone like you who steals from companies and forges signatures? Yes, I can see why Adrian would appreciate that skill set. You smug bitch. You think you're so clever. I am clever, which is why I'm still here and you're panicking on a burner phone. Vivian's voice hardened. Here's what's going to happen, Selena. You're going to return every asset you've stolen. You're going to disappear from Adrian's life and from London, and you're going to do it quietly, without drama. Or what? Or I release evidence of your fraud to Interpol, the FCA, and every newspaper that will print it. Your face will be on the front page of the Telegraph under headlines about aristocratic sex scandals and financial crime. Is that the kind of attention you want? Silence. Then, you don't have evidence. I have £40 million worth of evidence. Signed documents with your name, email communications, bank records. I have enough to put you in prison for 10 years. Vivian paused. But if you cooperate, I might settle for just destroying your reputation. I won't let you do this. You don't have a choice. The only question is whether you disappear now, or whether I drag you through courts and media until there's nothing left of you but a cautionary tale. Another pause. Vivian could hear Selena's breathing, ragged with fury and fear. Adrian will protect me. Adrian can't protect himself anymore. Did he tell you about the board vote? About losing his transfer authority? He's a neutered duke playing at power while I dismantle everything he values. You really think he has resources left for protecting his mistress? The call disconnected. Vivian stood holding her phone, adrenaline singing through her system. She'd just declared open war. Thomas appeared in his doorway. That was unbelievably reckless. Calculated reckless. She needed to know I'm not afraid of her. You should be afraid. This woman casually discusses murder. You just threatened her directly. Which is why I have Keller's team and you monitoring everything. She can't touch me without exposure. Vivian turned to face her brother. Fear is what she wants. It's how predators operate. They make you afraid so you don't fight back. I'm done being afraid. Courage and stupidity look similar until one of them gets you killed. Then make sure it's courage. They stared at each other, siblings who'd once played in gardens and climbed trees, now standing in the center of something dark and dangerous. "I've got something on Selena," Thomas said finally. "Took some digging, but her past isn't as clean as she pretends." "Tell me." "Real name is Selena Volkov. Russian father, Austrian mother. Grew up in Vienna, but she's got connections to some questionable financial operations in Eastern Europe. Nothing proven, but her name appears adjacent to several fraud investigations in Prague and Moscow. She's done this before. Looks like it. Target wealthy men, infiltrate their finances, extract what she can, move on. Adrian's just her biggest score. Do we have proof? Working on it, but I've got a contact in Vienna who might have access to sealed court documents. Give me 72 hours. Do it. If she has a criminal history, even unproven allegations, it's leverage. Thomas nodded and left her alone with London's lights and her racing thoughts. 3 days passed in a blur of strategic moves and countermoves. Vivian attended board meetings, restructured corporate agreements, and methodically isolated Adrian from the power structures he'd taken for granted. She was polite, professional, devastating. Adrian fought back, but his defense was weak. He claimed the property transfers were legitimate business investments, that Selena was simply a consultant, that Vivian was manufacturing scandal to punish him for a personal affair. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the board wasn't interested in protecting him once they realized their own liability was at stake. By Friday, Adrian had been removed from all operational decisions pending the external audit's completion. Peter Thornton, the CFO, sent Vivian a private message. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Adrian nearly destroyed this company with his recklessness." P. Meanwhile, Thomas's investigation into Selena bore fruit. He appeared at the townhouse late Friday night with a folder full of documents. Vienna came through. Selena Volkov was investigated for defrauding a Czech businessman in 2018. The case was dropped. Victim refused to testify, but the preliminary findings are damning. Vivian read through page after page of familiar patterns. Selena infiltrating a wealthy man's life, gaining access to his finances, systematically transferring assets using forged documents. The businessman had lost over 20 million euros before he discovered the theft. Why did he drop the case? Speculation is she had something on him. Probably evidence of his own illegal activities. Standard compromat play. You can't expose me without exposing yourself. Does she have compromat on Adrian? If she does, I haven't found it yet, but I'm still looking. Vivian closed the folder, her mind churning through implications. If Selena had leverage over Adrian, it explained why he'd been so reluctant to cut her loose. The affair wasn't just about sex or affection, it was about control. We need to find what she's holding over him. It's the only way to fully separate them. Already working on it. I've got backdoor access to Adrian's phones and computers. If there's something, I'll find it. How long? Week, maybe 2. Depends how well she buried it. A week. Vivian could work with that. In the meantime, she had other moves to make. Saturday morning brought a surprise visitor to the Ashford townhouse. James Keller escorted Catherine Rothschild into the secured study, where Vivian was reviewing financial projections. "Catherine, this is unexpected. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I needed to speak with you privately." Catherine waited until Keller left before continuing. "James and I had a difficult conversation last night about the merger, about Adrian, about you." "I'm listening." "James wants to pull out of the Rothschild deal entirely. He says the Blackthorn scandal is too toxic to associate with." The words hit like a physical blow. The Rothschild merger was worth £300 million. Losing it would devastate Blackthorn Holdings and make Vivian look like she'd destroyed the company out of spite. "I see. But I convinced him otherwise." Catherine leaned forward. "I told him the scandal isn't Blackthorn Holdings, it's Adrian, and that you're the best chance the company has of surviving this disaster. He's agreed to proceed, but on one condition. Which is, you take operational control immediately, not just transfer authority, full executive leadership. Adrian gets removed from all decision-making until the audit clears." It was a coup. Corporate overthrow delivered with aristocratic politeness. The board would never approve that, Vivian said carefully. The board will approve what the Rothschilds recommend, and we're recommending you. Catherine's smile was steel-wrapped in silk. Consider it our investment in competent leadership. Why are you doing this? Because I'm tired of watching brilliant women get erased by mediocre men who take credit for their work. And because I want the merger to succeed, which means Adrian can't be anywhere near operational control. Vivian felt something unlock in her chest. Not just gratitude, but recognition. Catherine understood. Not just the business necessity, but the deeper truth. This was about reclaiming power stolen by someone who'd never earned it. When? Emergency board vote, Monday morning. James will be there personally to propose the executive restructuring. It'll pass. I've already secured enough votes. Adrian will fight this. Let him fight. He's already lost. Catherine stood, smoothing her skirt. Sometimes the best revenge is simply taking back what was always yours. After Catherine left, Vivian sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what was about to happen. She wasn't just destroying Adrian's reputation anymore. She was taking his company, the family legacy he'd inherited and nearly ruined, and she was going to rebuild it into something he could never have imagined. Her phone buzzed. Adrian. She answered. Yes? What did you do? His voice was raw with fury and something that might have been fear. Catherine Rothschild just called. Said she's recommending emergency executive restructuring, that I'm being removed from operational control. Then I guess the board agrees you're a liability. This is you. You're orchestrating this. I'm protecting company assets from further fraud. The fact that it removes you is just efficient problem solving. You can't do this, Vivian. It's my company, my family's legacy. Your family's legacy that I rebuilt from bankruptcy. Your company that I saved while you played Duke at garden parties. I didn't take anything, Adrian. I'm just reclaiming what I created. I'll fight this. I'll contest the vote. You'll lose. Catherine controls enough voting shares to ensure passage, and every board member knows you're under investigation. Fighting this just makes you look more guilty. She softened her voice, making it almost kind. Accept the restructuring gracefully, maintain some dignity, or fight it and get buried in scandal when the audit results become public. You're destroying me. No, you destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure everyone sees the rubble. She hung up before he could respond. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. The board convened at 8 a.m. James Rothschild attended personally, his presence lending authority to the proceedings. Adrian showed up looking like he hadn't slept in days. His aristocratic polish finally cracked enough to show the desperate man underneath. The vote was swift, 12-1 in favor of executive restructuring. Only Adrian voted against removing himself from power. Vivian Ashford was named interim CEO of Blackthorn Holdings, pending the audit's completion. Adrian was relegated to the ceremonial title of chairman, stripped of operational authority. He sat through the vote in silence, watching his world collapse in corporate language and parliamentary procedure. After the meeting, as board members congratulated Vivian on her new role, Adrian caught her arm in the hallway. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet. Selena and I will fight back. We have resources you don't know about. Vivian looked at his hand on her arm until he removed it. Adrian, Selena doesn't have resources. She has stolen money and a history of fraud in 3 countries. The moment this audit completes, she'll be facing criminal charges. Is that really the ally you want to tie yourself to? You don't know what you're talking about. I know she defrauded a Czech businessman for 20 million euros in 2018. I know she's been investigated for financial crimes in Prague and Moscow. I know her real name is Volkov, not Vale. Vivian stepped closer, her voice dropping. I know everything, Adrian. Every lie she's told you, every crime she's committed. And when this all comes crashing down, she won't be standing beside you. She'll be testifying against you to save herself. She left him standing in the corridor, surrounded by the empty trappings of a title that no longer meant anything. That evening, back at the Ashford townhouse, Vivian received an encrypted email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "We should talk." She opened it cautiously. Duchess Ashford, you've been thorough in your investigation of my activities. Impressive work, but you've made a critical error. You've assumed I'm the enemy. I'm not. Adrian is our mutual problem. Perhaps we can find a solution that benefits us both. I'll be at Café Bohème in Soho tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone. S. Vivian stared at the message, her mind racing through implications. Selena wanted to negotiate, which meant Selena was panicking, which meant Vivian's strategy was working. But meeting alone was reckless, dangerous, exactly the kind of move that got people killed. Thomas appeared behind her, reading over her shoulder. You're not seriously considering this. I'm considering what it means that she wants to meet. She's desperate. Desperate people do desperate things, like arrange accidents. Then we make sure it's not an accident. You'll be there watching. Keller's team will be there. She won't be able to touch me. And if she's planning something we haven't anticipated? Vivian turned to face her brother. Then I die knowing I didn't back down when someone threatened me. But I don't think that's her play. I think she's realized Adrian can't protect her anymore, and she's looking for an exit strategy. You're going to negotiate with the woman who wanted you dead. I'm going to listen to what she has to say, and then I'm going to decide whether she's more useful destroyed or deployed. Thomas shook his head but didn't argue further. I'll set up surveillance, but Viv, the moment this feels wrong, you run. Pride isn't worth your life. Agreed. The next afternoon, Vivian arrived at Café Bohème wearing a concealed recording device and knowing Thomas was positioned in a car across the street with visual on the entire cafe. Keller's team had swept the location earlier and confirmed it was clean. Selena was already there, sitting at a corner table where she could see the entire room. She looked different, less polished, more raw. The continental sophistication had been stripped away, revealing something harder underneath. Vivian sat down without greeting. You came, Selena said. You asked nicely. A bitter smile. I doubt you do anything because someone asked nicely. True. So why am I here? Selena leaned forward, voice low. Because we both have a problem named Adrian Blackthorne, and I think we can solve it together. I'm listening. Adrian is weak. You know it. I know it. He's a figurehead who took credit for your work while thinking he was brilliant. Men like that don't just lose gracefully. They lash out, become vindictive, dangerous. Is this where you tell me you were protecting me by suggesting murder? Selena had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was angry, desperate. I said things I shouldn't have. You suggested having me killed. That's not something you unsay. No, it's not, which is why I'm here trying to make it right. Selena pulled out a USB drive, set it on the table between them. This contains everything I have on Adrian, every illegal deal, every compromising situation, every piece of leverage he's accumulated over 6 years, including things you don't know about. Vivian stared at the drive. Why would you give this to me? Because Adrian's going down, and I'm not going down with him. You've already ensured that. The audit, the board vote, the criminal investigation that's coming. I'm not stupid. I know when the game is over. So this is you buying immunity. This is me offering a trade. You get everything you need to completely destroy Adrian. I get immunity from criminal prosecution and enough money to disappear quietly. How much money? £5 million. Enough to start over somewhere that doesn't extradite to the UK. Vivian considered the offer. $5 million was nothing compared to the $40 million Selena had helped steal. But it was also a clean exit. Selena disappeared, Adrian lost his only ally, and Vivian got evidence she might not find otherwise. What's on the drive that I don't already know? All. Adrian's been laundering money for a Russian oligarch, not Blackthorne Holdings money, personal funds through offshore accounts. It's how he first connected with me. My family has connections in that world. The revelation landed like a bomb. Money laundering for Russian oligarchs was the kind of scandal that didn't just destroy careers. It triggered international investigations. How long has this been happening? 4 years, since before we started our affair. He needed someone who understood how to move money invisibly. I needed a wealthy Western partner. It was mutually beneficial. Until I started investigating. Until you started investigating, Selena agreed. Now we're both exposed. The difference is, I'm smart enough to cut my losses. Vivian reached for the drive, then paused. How do I know this information is real? Sample file. Selena pulled out her phone, forwarded something to Vivian's email. Bank statements showing transfers between Adrian's accounts and the oligarch's shell companies. That's just the beginning. The full documentation is on the drive. Vivian checked her phone. The documents looked legitimate, damning transfers with Adrian's digital signatures. If I agree to this, you disappear. Completely. No contact with Adrian, no attempts to reclaim assets, no surprise reappearances. I disappear. You'll never hear from me again. And if you're lying, if this is some kind of trap? Selena's laugh was harsh. Look at me, Duchess. Do I look like someone with leverage to set traps? You've destroyed everything I built. I'm offering you the only thing I have left. Information in exchange for enough money to run. That's not a trap. That's survival. It was true. Selena looked cornered, desperate in the way predators get when they're suddenly prey. I'll need 48 hours to verify the information. I don't have 48 hours. The moment Adrian realizes I'm negotiating with you, he'll come after both of us. Then you should have thought about that before stealing 40 million pounds from my company. They stared at each other across the small table, two women who'd been positioned as enemies, now calculating whether cooperation served them better than continued war. 24 hours, Selena said finally. That's the best I can do. After that, I'm running whether you pay me or not. And Adrian will know I gave you something before I go. Then I guess you'd better hope the information is worth 5 million pounds. Vivian took the USB drive, stood, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. In the car, Thomas was nearly vibrating with tension. Tell me you didn't just make a deal with her. I didn't make a deal. I acquired intelligence and offered potential consideration for its value. That's the same thing. It's really not. Vivian plugged the USB drive into Thomas's laptop. But let's see what we bought before arguing semantics. The files were extensive. Bank records, email threads, encrypted communications between Adrian and someone identified only as Dimitri K. The money trail was complex but traceable, millions moving through shell companies in Cyprus, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands before landing in accounts controlled by people with very Russian names. Jesus, Thomas breathed. This is bigger than fraud. This is organized crime adjacency. This is leverage. Vivian scrolled through document after document, seeing Adrian's downfall rendered in financial transactions and criminal stupidity. With this, I don't just remove him from Blackthorn Holdings. I make sure he can never rebuild, never reclaim influence, never threaten anyone again. You're going to turn him in. I'm going to give him a choice. Surrender everything quietly, or watch me hand this information to every law enforcement agency in Europe. Thomas studied his sister's face. You know he'll choose fighting. Men like Adrian always do. Then he'll lose. Publicly. Catastrophically. Vivian closed the laptop. Verify this information by tomorrow morning. If it's legitimate, pay Selena her $5 million and make sure she's on a plane to somewhere without extradition treaties. And Adrian? Adrian gets one last chance to do the right thing, and when he refuses, he gets destroyed. That night, Vivian drafted a letter to her husband. It was formal, comprehensive, and gave him 72 hours to sign documents transferring his remaining shares in Blackthorn Holdings to her, relinquishing all claims to company assets, and accepting a modest stipend in exchange for silence about the circumstances of his removal. The alternative was prosecution for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges that would send him to prison for 20 years. She sent the letter via courier to Blackthorn Manor at midnight, timing it to arrive when Adrian would be alone, vulnerable, probably drunk. His response came 90 minutes later. A single word text. No. Vivian read it without surprise, without disappointment. She'd known how this would end from the moment she'd found Selena's letter in his study. Adrian was never going to surrender peacefully. His pride wouldn't allow it, which meant she was going to finish what she'd started. She forwarded the entire contents of Selena's USB drive to the Financial Conduct Authority, the National Crime Agency, and Interpol with a detailed summary of Adrian's activities. She copied Marcus Webb, Edmund Carstairs, and 3 investigative journalists known for breaking financial scandal stories. By dawn, Adrian Blackthorn's life as he knew it was over. He just didn't know it yet. Vivian stood in her townhouse study, watching London wake up to a morning that would soon be full of sirens and subpoenas and everything Adrian had spent 6 years pretending couldn't touch aristocracy. She felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just cold certainty that some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness, they deserve consequences. Her phone buzzed. Catherine Rothschild. Whatever you did last night, half of London's law enforcement is suddenly very interested in Blackthorn Holdings. Should I be concerned? Vivian typed back, only if you're involved in money laundering. Are you? God, no. Just checking you're not about to tank my merger. The merger is safe. Adrian isn't. Good. He deserves whatever's coming. By noon, the first news broke. Financial Times ran a piece titled, Duke under investigation for international money laundering. The Telegraph followed with, Blackthorn Holdings CEO cooperating with criminal probe. Social media exploded with speculation, old photos of Adrian and Vivian at charity functions, conspiracy theories about aristocratic corruption. Adrian called her 17 times. She answered none of them. At 3 p.m., Marcus Webb called. They've frozen all of Adrian's personal accounts. He's effectively broke until the investigation concludes. And Blackthorn Holdings? Protected. Your cooperation with authorities and the emergency restructuring kept the company separate from his personal liabilities. Well played, Vivian. This isn't about playing well, this is about survival. Call it whatever helps you sleep, but you just executed one of the most effective corporate takedowns I've seen in 30 years. Adrian never stood a chance once you decided to act. That evening, Keller reported that Adrian had tried to leave the country and been stopped at Heathrow. His passport had been flagged pending the investigation. He was trapped in London, broke, under criminal scrutiny, and abandoned by every ally who'd once considered him powerful. Vivian should have felt victorious. Instead, she just felt tired. 6 years of marriage reduced to this, mutual destruction, criminal investigations, and the hollow victory of proving she was more ruthless than the man who'd betrayed her. Thomas found her in the study, staring at nothing. It's done. Selena's on a plane to Buenos Aires. The information checked out. Everything she gave you was legitimate. Adrian's facing charges in 3 countries. I know. Then why do you look like someone died? Because someone did. The woman I was before all this, she's gone. I had to kill her to become someone capable of doing what needed to be done. You're talking about innocence. I'm talking about the belief that love matters more than power, that loyalty is real, that people who promise forever mean it. Vivian turned to face her brother. I'm talking about every stupid, naive assumption I had about what marriage meant. Adrian didn't just cheat on me, Thomas. He taught me that trust is weakness and mercy is vulnerability. That's a dark lesson. It's an accurate one. And now I get to rebuild a life based on that accuracy instead of pretty lies about partnership and respect. Thomas sat beside her, quiet for a long moment. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choices. Given what Adrian did, what Selena threatened, you protected yourself. That's not darkness. That's survival. Survival, Vivian repeated. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? She thought about Adrian, trapped and desperate, about Selena, fleeing with blood money to a country that wouldn't extradite her, about herself, sitting in a fortified townhouse surrounded by evidence of systematic betrayal. Justice, she said finally, expensive, exhausting, merciless justice, and I'm not done delivering it yet. Because even with Adrian facing criminal charges, even with his accounts frozen and his reputation destroyed, Vivian knew the final move hadn't been played. The aristocracy protected its own. The legal system moved slowly. There were still ways Adrian could wriggle free, cut deals, emerge damaged but not destroyed. And she couldn't risk that. Couldn't risk him rebuilding, returning, retaliating. So Vivian Ashford made one final decision, the kind that separates survival from conquest. She would testify. Publicly, against her own husband, would stand in court and detail every crime, every betrayal, every forged signature, would make sure the world saw Adrian Blackthorn not as a tragic figure who'd made mistakes, but as a criminal who'd exploited his wife's genius while crediting himself. It would be humiliating for both of them. The media would feast on it for months, but when it was over, no one would ever underestimate her again. And Adrian would spend his remaining years understanding exactly what it cost to betray a woman who'd given him everything. The morning Vivian was scheduled to give her deposition, London woke to news that would reshape everything she'd built. Thomas burst into her bedroom at 6 a.m., not bothering to knock, his face carrying the kind of expression that preceded catastrophes. We have a problem. Vivian was already dressed, preparing for 8 hours of testimony that would dismantle Adrian's remaining credibility. She turned from the mirror, reading disaster in her brother's body language. What kind of problem? The kind where someone's been 3 steps ahead of us this entire time. Thomas thrust his laptop toward her. Edmund Carstairs just released a statement to the Financial Times. He's claiming you've been conducting a coordinated campaign of corporate fraud and defamation against your husband. Says he has evidence you manufactured documents, bribed board members, and orchestrated false criminal allegations. The words didn't make sense initially. Edmund was her ally, had been feeding her information for weeks, had helped her build the case against Adrian. That's insane. Edmund gave me most of the evidence I'm using. I know, which is why his betrayal is so effective. Thomas pulled up the article. He's positioned himself as a whistleblower, claims he was initially deceived by your story, but eventually discovered you were fabricating evidence to destroy Adrian out of revenge for his affair. He's provided the FCA with what he calls proof of your manipulation. Vivian's hands went cold. What proof? Emails between you and him discussing payment for information, bank transfers, meeting records, all framed to make it look like you were paying him to manufacture dirt on Adrian. But those were legitimate consulting fees. He was investigating actual fraud. Except he's now claiming the fraud never existed, that you hired him to create false paper trails, making Adrian look guilty. Thomas's voice was tight with controlled fury. And because Edmund has a reputation as a straight shooter in financial circles, people are believing him. The deposition. Vivian was supposed to testify in 3 hours, supposed to detail Adrian's crimes under oath while prosecutors and defense attorneys dissected every claim. And now her primary source was claiming she'd fabricated everything. Adrian set this up. The realization hit with physical force. Edmund was never on my side. He was Adrian's insurance policy. Looks that way. Edmund's been feeding you real information mixed with manufactured evidence. Enough truth to seem credible while building a defense that you're a vindictive wife inventing crimes. The money laundering evidence, is that real? Thomas hesitated. I'm checking now, but Viv, if Edmund helped source any of those documents, the defense will argue they're forged. Even if they're legitimate, his involvement contaminates the entire evidence chain. Vivian felt the ground shifting beneath everything she'd constructed. 6 weeks of methodical destruction, of strategic dismantling, suddenly revealed as a trap she'd walked into while thinking she was setting one. Who else knows? Edmund released the statement an hour ago. By now, every major outlet is running some version of the story. Your lawyers are fielding calls. The prosecution is probably considering whether to postpone your deposition. Her phone started buzzing. Marcus Webb. She answered on speaker. Tell me Edmund's lying, Marcus said without preamble. He's lying. But he's lying strategically, using real transactions and framing them as conspiracy. That's what I thought. But Vivian, this is bad. He's got documents showing you paid him over £200,000 in the past month. Screenshots of your messages discussing Adrian's vulnerabilities, meeting logs that could be interpreted as planning a character assassination campaign. All of which happened in the context of legitimate investigation. I know that. You know that. But a jury? Marcus's doubt was palpable. Edmund's story is simpler, more dramatic. Scorned wife manufactures evidence against cheating husband. It's tabloid gold and reasonable doubt wrapped in one package. Vivian closed her eyes, thinking through implications. Can we still prosecute Adrian? Technically, yes. The National Crime Agency has their own investigation independent of your involvement. But Edmund's statement damages your credibility as a witness. And if any of the evidence you've provided gets thrown out as potentially fabricated, it weakens the entire case. So Adrian might walk. Adrian might walk, or get a reduced charge, or plead to something minor and avoid prison entirely. Marcus paused. I'm sorry, Vivian. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. She hung up and stood motionless in her bedroom, feeling the architecture of her revenge crumbling. Edmund hadn't just betrayed her, he'd made her look like the criminal. Every strategic move she'd made now reframed as vindictive manipulation. Every piece of evidence she'd gathered now suspect. We can fight this, Thomas said, but his conviction was thin. We can prove Edmund's lying. Can we? He's been documenting his relationship with me for weeks. Every conversation we had, he was probably recording. Every transaction designed to look innocent initially, but damning in retrospect. Vivian opened her laptop, pulling up her communications with Edmund. Look at this message I sent. We need to make Adrian look as guilty as possible before the audit completes. In context, it means presenting accurate evidence effectively. Out of context, it sounds like I'm manufacturing guilt. Thomas read over her shoulder, his expression darkening. He's been building this defense since the beginning. Adrian knew you'd come after him. Edmund was planted to let you think you were winning while actually digging your grave. How did I miss this? The question was rhetorical, aimed at her own arrogance. I thought I was smarter than Adrian, thought I'd planned for everything. You planned for an enemy you understood. Adrian's evolved, or someone's helping him evolve. Vivian thought about the timeline, about how quickly Adrian had crumbled after the board vote, how desperate he'd seemed, how thoroughly defeated. It had all been performance. I need to talk to Edmund directly. That's probably a terrible idea. Everything's a terrible idea at this point. At least this way I'll know exactly what I'm dealing with. She called Edmund from an encrypted line Thomas had set up. He answered on the second ring, sounding relaxed in a way that made her want to reach through the phone and strangle him. Duchess, I was wondering when you'd call. You've destroyed everything I built. I assume that makes you feel accomplished. I've protected an innocent man from a vindictive spouse. Rather different framing, don't you think? Innocent? Adrian's been laundering money for Russian oligarchs, committing fraud. You helped me document it. I documented what you claimed was fraud. Whether it actually constitutes criminal activity is apparently disputed. Your interpretation was colored by emotional bias, understandable given the affair, but not legally sound. The gaslighting was breathtaking. Edmund was rewriting objective crime as subjective interpretation. Why? Vivian kept her voice level. Why help me for weeks just to destroy everything now? Because Adrian offered me something better than your consulting fees. Partnership, real power instead of commissioned investigations. Edmund's tone shifted, became almost friendly. I admire what you tried to do, Vivian, truly. Building a case that comprehensive while maintaining your social position? Impressive. But you made one critical error. Which was? You assumed people's loyalty could be bought with money and righteous anger. Adrian understood that loyalty goes to whoever offers the most valuable future. And his future, even diminished, is still more valuable than yours. He's facing criminal charges. Charges you helped manufacture. Which means if you're discredited, the charges weaken significantly. Adrian may lose some assets, pay some fines, but he'll survive. And when he does, he'll remember who stood with him and who tried to destroy him. You're betting on the wrong person. Am I? You're about to give testimony that will be torn apart by defense attorneys armed with evidence of your bias and potential evidence fabrication. Adrian's legal team has already filed motions to exclude your deposition based on Edmund's statement. Meanwhile, I'm positioned as the honorable consultant who discovered misconduct and reported it. Edmund laughed, sharp and satisfied. I'm not betting on the wrong person, Duchess. You are. Vivian wanted to argue, to threaten, to do something that would wipe the smugness from his voice. But Edmund had calculated correctly. He'd played both sides and positioned himself to win regardless of outcome. I'm going to destroy you for this. No, you're not. You're going to discover that without credible evidence and with your reputation damaged, you have very limited options, but I appreciate the threat. Shows spirit. He paused. For what it's worth, I genuinely believe Adrian was foolish to betray you. You're extraordinary, but extraordinary doesn't trump strategic positioning. He hung up. Vivian stood holding the phone, feeling something crystallize inside her. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too reactive. This was colder. The realization that she'd been playing a game with rules she didn't fully understand while her opponents were playing a different game entirely. What now? Thomas asked. Now I go give my deposition and make the best case I can with compromised evidence. They might not even let you testify. Edmund's statement gives Adrian's lawyers grounds to exclude you as a biased witness. Then I make sure they can't exclude me. I give testimony so precise, so documented, so unimpeachable, that even Edmund's betrayal can't undermine it. Viv, I don't think you're understanding the situation. Edmund has destroyed your credibility. Anything you say now will be filtered through suspicion that you're manufacturing evidence. which is why I won't rely on evidence Edmund touched. I'll focus on what I know firsthand. Bank accounts I personally discovered, transactions I witnessed, conversations I heard directly. Vivian pulled up files on her laptop. Edmund contaminated some of my case. Not all of it. I can still prove Adrian's crimes if I'm smart about which evidence I present. Thomas looked skeptical but didn't argue further. The deposition was held in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and institutional anxiety. Adrian's legal team had quadrupled since the investigation started. 5 attorneys where there used to be 2, all wearing expressions of professional aggression. Vivian sat across from them with Marcus beside her and a court reporter documenting every word. Adrian wasn't present. His lawyers had successfully argued his attendance would be inflammatory, but she felt his presence anyway. This was his counterattack, delivered through surrogates who'd been preparing for weeks while she'd thought she was winning. Lead defense counsel was a woman named Victoria Ashworth, known for destroying witnesses with surgical precision. She smiled at Vivian with the warmth of a snake eyeing prey. Duchess Blackthorne, thank you for joining us. I know this must be difficult given recent revelations about your relationship with Edmund Carstairs. Opening with an attack disguised as sympathy, Vivian had expected it. Mr. Carstairs and I had a professional consulting relationship. His subsequent statements are his own and don't reflect the truth of my investigation. Your investigation. Interesting phrasing. You see yourself as conducting an investigation rather than cooperating with authorities? I see myself as protecting my company from fraud, which I then reported to appropriate authorities. After manufacturing evidence with Mr. Carstairs' assistance, I manufactured nothing. I documented crimes that occurred. Victoria smiled wider. We'll return to that. First, let's establish timeline. When did you first suspect your husband of financial impropriety? When I discovered a letter from Selina Vale detailing property transfers made with my forged signature. This letter. Victoria produced a document. Can you verify this is the letter you claim to have found? Vivian examined it. Her stomach dropped. The letter was similar to what she'd photographed, but not identical. Key phrases were slightly different. The signature looked wrong. This isn't the exact letter I found. Oh? You have the original? I photographed it. The original remained in my husband's study. So you no longer have access to the original document. And the photograph you took? Do you have that? Vivian pulled out her phone, navigated to the photo. Except it wasn't there. The image she'd taken that first night, the one she'd referenced a dozen times while building her case, deleted. Someone's deleted it from my phone. How convenient. So the foundational document that supposedly started your investigation no longer exists in verifiable form. We only have your memory of what it said. Marcus intervened. My client's phone may have been compromised. We'll need to conduct forensic recovery. By all means, though I suspect forensics will show the photo was deleted by the account holder, not external interference. Victoria made a note. Let's move on. You've claimed Duke Blackthorne engaged in money laundering for Russian oligarchs. What evidence supports this allegation? Bank records showing transfers between my husband's accounts and shell companies controlled by individuals with Russian connections. And you obtained these records how? Through investigation conducted by Edmund Carstairs and my brother, Thomas Ashford. Mr. Carstairs, who has since stated you paid him to manufacture evidence, and your brother, who has no legal authority to access banking records. So you're basing serious criminal allegations on potentially fabricated documents and illegally obtained information. The documents aren't fabricated. The oligarch connections are real. Are they? We've had independent forensic analysis done on the documents you've provided. Several show signs of digital manipulation, date stamps that don't match metadata, signatures that fail authentication testing. Either you've been deceived by false information or you've participated in creating it. Vivian felt the trap closing. I participated in nothing illegal. If documents were manipulated, it was done without my knowledge. Without your knowledge. Despite you paying Edmund Carstairs over £200,000 for investigation services. Despite multiple meetings where you discussed strategy for destroying your husband's reputation. Despite messages you sent explicitly stating you wanted to make Duke Blackthorne look as guilty as possible. Victoria leaned forward. Duchess, isn't the truth simply that you discovered your husband's infidelity and decided to destroy him using any means necessary, including manufacturing evidence of crimes he never committed? No? No? Then explain these bank records showing payments to Edmund Carstairs labeled as consulting fees that coincidentally match his statement about being hired to fabricate evidence. Those were legitimate consulting fees for legitimate investigation. Investigation of what? A marriage gone bad? Hurt feelings? Because the crimes you're alleging either don't exist or can't be proven with untainted evidence. Marcus objected multiple times, but Victoria had done her work. Every answer Vivian gave was reframed as vindictive spouse behavior. Every piece of evidence questioned as potentially fabricated. By the time they broke for lunch, Vivian's testimony had been systematically dismantled. In the hallway, Marcus pulled her aside. "This is worse than I thought. They're not just defending Adrian, they're putting you on trial." I noticed. And without Edmund's cooperation, without the original documents, without clean evidence chain, "Vivian, we might lose this completely." She leaned against the wall, feeling exhaustion and rage competing for dominance. "What are my options? Honestly, withdraw your testimony. Let the NCA pursue their independent investigation. Distance yourself from this case before Adrian's team makes you look like a criminal. If I withdraw, Adrian wins. His lawyers argue I'm backing down because I fabricated everything. The investigation collapses. If you continue, they're going to destroy you on cross-examination, make you look unhinged, possibly expose you to criminal liability for evidence tampering even if you didn't actually tamper with anything." Vivian closed her eyes. 6 weeks of work, of strategy, of careful documentation, all weaponized against her by an opponent she'd underestimated. Adrian hadn't been weak. He'd been patient, letting her build a case while simultaneously building her grave. "I need to talk to Adrian directly." "That's against protocol. You're giving testimony against him." "I don't care about protocol. I need to understand what I'm really fighting." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue but recognized futility when he saw it. "I'll see what I can arrange, but Vivian, whatever you're planning, be careful. Adrian's proven he's more dangerous than you gave him credit for." The meeting was arranged for 6 p.m. in a neutral lawyer's office. Armed with the knowledge that she was probably walking into another trap, Vivian went anyway because she needed to see Adrian's face. Needed to understand whether Edmund's betrayal was Adrian's brilliance or someone else's. Adrian looked better than he had in weeks. The desperate, defeated quality gone, replaced by something harder. He stood when she entered, ever the gentleman, but his smile had edges. "Vivian, you're looking well despite the difficult day. Cut the aristocratic pleasantries, you set me up. I defended myself, rather different thing. Edmund was working for you the whole time. Edmund was working for Edmund. I simply offered him better incentives than you did." Adrian gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. We should talk." She remained standing. "Why? You've already won. Your lawyers are tearing apart my testimony. My evidence is compromised. What's left to discuss?" "Terms. I didn't ask you here to gloat, Vivian. I asked because despite everything, I'd prefer we end this without completely destroying each other." "You tried to destroy me. Your mistress suggested killing me." Selena's suggestions were her own. I never agreed to that. Adrian's expression shifted, became almost earnest. "I know you won't believe this, but I never wanted things to get this ugly. The affair was a mistake. Allowing Selena access to company assets was catastrophically stupid. But everything since, the investigation, the board coup, the criminal charges, that was you escalating beyond what was necessary. The gaslighting was elegant, making her aggression the problem while his crimes were just mistakes. You stole 40 million pounds, laundered money, forged my signature repeatedly. I made questionable business decisions. Whether they constitute crimes is apparently disputed." Adrian moved closer, not threatening but present. "Here's what I'm offering. Drop the criminal pursuit. Stop cooperating with authorities. In exchange, I'll sign over majority control of Blackthorn Holdings to you. You get the company, I maintain dignity and avoid prison. We both walk away with something. You expect me to let you commit crimes without consequences? I expect you to recognize that consequences are negotiable between people of our class. Prison doesn't serve anyone. But you running the company you built? That's justice of a sort." Vivian studied his face, looking for deception. "What's the catch?" "No catch. I sign documents tomorrow transferring operational control. You release a statement saying the investigation was based on misunderstandings and business disputes rather than criminal activity. Within 6 months, we're divorced quietly. You keep the company, I keep my freedom and enough assets to maintain basic lifestyle. Why would you offer this now? Your lawyers are winning. Winning today doesn't mean winning tomorrow. The NCA investigation continues regardless of your testimony. If they uncover real evidence independent of anything you've provided, I'm still exposed. This way, we control the narrative. We both get what we actually want. You get the company, I avoid prison. It was logical, reasonable even. Exactly the kind of compromise that powerful people made to avoid mutually assured destruction, which meant it was almost certainly a trap. I need to think about it. Take 24 hours. But Vivian, understand something. This offer expires. If you refuse, we continue this fight until one of us is completely destroyed. And I've learned from my mistakes. I won't underestimate you again. She left the meeting feeling displaced, like she'd entered one reality and exited into another. Everything she thought she understood about Adrian's strategy suddenly uncertain. Thomas was waiting at the townhouse. How'd it go? He offered me the company in exchange for dropping criminal charges. That's surprisingly reasonable for someone who supposedly has the upper hand. Which is why I don't trust it. Adrian doesn't concede unless concession serves him. Vivian poured herself whiskey, normally not her habit but necessary tonight. He's either genuinely worried the NCA will find something he can't defend against, or this is another level of manipulation I'm not seeing. Could be both. Edmund's betrayal bought him time and damaged your credibility, but if independent investigation proceeds, they might find evidence he can't blame on you fabricating. Or I accept his offer, take the company, and discover too late that I've somehow incriminated myself by backing away from charges. Made myself look like I was lying all along. Thomas ran scenarios silently. There's another possibility. What if Adrian's being pressured by someone else? The Russian oligarch connections, if those are real, those aren't people who tolerate legal scrutiny. They might be forcing Adrian to end this quickly. The thought hadn't occurred to Vivian. She'd been so focused on Adrian as opponent that she'd forgotten he might also be someone's pawn. If oligarchs are involved, dropping charges makes me complicit in whatever they're doing, or refusing makes you a threat they decide to handle. These aren't people who fight in courtrooms. Vivian felt the trap from multiple directions. Accept Adrian's offer and potentially enable criminals. Refuse and risk both legal destruction and physical threat. Continue fighting and watch her credibility dissolve further. I need independent verification of the money laundering claims. Evidence that doesn't flow through Edmund or Adrian, something the NCA found themselves. I can try to get that, but Viv, even approaching NCA contacts could be seen as witness tampering at this point. Then do it carefully, because I need to know whether Adrian's crimes are real before I decide to let him walk away from them. The next morning brought another shock. Catherine Rothschild requested emergency meeting at her Mayfair office. Vivian arrived expecting support or strategic advice. Instead, Catherine handed her a legal document with an expression of profound regret. The Rothschild merger is being suspended pending resolution of the Blackthorn investigation. James's decision, not mine. I argued against it but was overruled. The merger. £300 million and the cornerstone of Blackthorn Holdings' expansion strategy. Without it, the company's value plummeted. Catherine, this will destroy months of work. I know. And I'm sorry. But James believes the reputational risk is too high. Edmund's statement, the evidence disputes, the possibility that Blackthorn Holdings has been involved in systematic fraud. He can't justify the association. The fraud was Adrian's, not the company's. Legally, maybe. But in public perception, the distinction blurs. And perception matters as much as reality in our world. Catherine looked genuinely pained. I fought for you, Vivian. Please believe that. But I'm not the final decision maker. What would change James's mind? Clear resolution. Either Adrian is definitively prosecuted and removed from any company association, or the charges are proven false and the company's reputation restored. Right now, you're in limbo, which is the worst possible position. After Catherine left, Vivian sat in her car processing cascading failures. Edmund's betrayal had contaminated her evidence. Adrian's legal team was shredding her credibility. The merger that would have secured Blackthorn Holdings' future was suspended. and she had 24 hours to decide whether to accept Adrian's compromise. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered warily. Duchess Blackthorn, we haven't been formally introduced. My name is Dmitry Kozlov, the Russian oligarch, the man Adrian had allegedly been laundering money for. Vivian's blood went cold. How did you get this number? I have access to many things, Duchess, including information about your current legal difficulties. His English was perfect, accent barely detectable. I'm calling because your husband's problems have become inconvenient for me. I'd like to offer perspective. I'm not interested in perspective from criminals. Then you're not interested in understanding the actual situation you're in. Dimitri's voice was calm, almost friendly. The money you believe Adrian laundered wasn't laundered. It was legitimate investment in various European properties, investments I had valid business reasons to make. Your interpretation of criminal activity is incorrect. Bank records show complex international transactions that appear suspicious to untrained observers, which is why I've provided additional documentation to the National Crime Agency proving all transactions were legal, properly reported, and above board. Vivian felt reality shifting again. You're claiming there was no money laundering? I'm stating that what appeared to be money laundering was legitimate business conducted in a manner that, in retrospect, should have been more transparent. I've already clarified this with authorities. Your husband may have made questionable decisions about disclosure, but he committed no crimes involving my money. This is you protecting him. This is me protecting myself from unnecessary legal attention. Adrian's legal troubles don't serve me. Your crusade against him doesn't serve me, so I've taken steps to remove the most serious allegations from consideration. By providing false documentation, by providing true documentation that was previously unavailable, perhaps you should ask yourself why Edmund Carstairs presented information in the most damning light possible. Who benefits from making Adrian look like a criminal while making you look vindictive? The question landed with weight. Vivian had been so focused on Adrian and Selena as enemies that she hadn't considered whether someone else was orchestrating chaos. Who benefits from this? Someone who wants both you and Adrian weakened. Someone with interest in acquiring Blackthorn Holdings assets at distressed prices. I suggest you examine who's been positioning themselves to pick up pieces when your empire crumbles. Edmund Carstairs has made several inquiries about purchasing Blackthorn Holdings shares at significant discount. He's also been communicating with Adrian's mistress, coordinating strategy. Your husband may have betrayed you, Duchess, but he's also being betrayed. We're both collateral damage in someone else's acquisition plan. Dmitry hung up before Vivian could respond. She sat stunned, reconfiguring everything. Edmund hadn't been helping her or Adrian. He'd been destroying both of them, creating chaos that devalued Blackthorn Holdings so he could acquire it cheaply. Selena wasn't just Adrian's mistress. She was Edmund's partner, planned to infiltrate Adrian's life and create vulnerability. The affair hadn't been Adrian's weakness. It had been Edmund's strategy. Thomas called before she could process fully. I've got something. Tracked Edmund's communications through some very illegal channels. He's been planning a hostile takeover of Blackthorn Holdings for 8 months. Started right around when Selena entered Adrian's life. Selena works for Edmund. Looks that way. She's not Austrian aristocracy. She's a corporate spy Edmund's used in 3 previous operations. They target wealthy men, create scandals, devalue companies, then Edmund acquires assets at discount. You and Adrian were just their biggest play. The pieces assembled into a picture Vivian had been too close to see. Edmund identifying Blackthorn Holdings as target, planting Selena to compromise Adrian, waiting for Vivian to discover the affair, then positioning himself as her ally while actually manipulating her into destroying her own company's value. The evidence he gave me, how much was real? Maybe 40%. Enough truth to seem credible. The rest was exaggerated or fabricated to make Adrian look worse than he was. And your response to the false evidence made you look unhinged, which depressed company value and gave Edmund opportunity to acquire shares cheaply while both Adrian and I were fighting each other. Vivian felt sick with recognition of her own manipulation. I've been played completely. We've both been played. Edmund's good at this. He's run similar operations in Germany and Switzerland. Always targets family businesses with marital problems. Creates chaos, acquires assets, disappears before anyone realizes they've been orchestrated. How do we stop him? That's the problem. Edmund hasn't technically done anything illegal. Selena's affair with Adrian was real, even if strategically motivated. Edmund providing you information, even false information, could be argued as good faith investigation that turned out flawed. He's positioned himself to claim plausible deniability while reaping rewards. Vivian thought through options. She could expose Edmund's scheme, but without concrete proof of conspiracy, it looked like sour grapes. She could accept Adrian's offer, but that left Edmund free to target other families. She could keep fighting in court, but that just provided more chaos for Edmund to exploit. Every choice led to some version of losing. There has to be a way to turn this against him. If there is, we need to find it in the next 12 hours, because Edmund's already started making acquisition offers to minority shareholders. He's moving fast now that chaos is maximized. Vivian returned to the townhouse, dismissed Keller's security team temporarily. She needed privacy for what she was planning, and made a call she never thought she'd make. Adrian answered immediately. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. We've both been manipulated by Edmund Carstairs. He planted Selena to compromise you, positioned himself as my ally while feeding me false evidence. Now he's making hostile acquisition plays for Blackthorn Holdings while we're too busy destroying each other to notice. Silence. Then Adrian's voice, stripped of aristocratic pretense. How do you know this? Dmitry Kozlov called me. Thomas tracked Edmund's communications. Everything that's happened, the affair, the investigation, the board fight, Edmund orchestrated it to devalue our company so he could acquire it cheaply. Selena works for Edmund? Selena's a corporate spy. You're not her first target. I'm guessing she has something on you that prevented you from cutting her loose completely. She has documents about the Prague properties. I thought they were her insurance policy against me abandoning her. Now I realize they were Edmund's leverage to keep me compromised. So we've both been played by someone smarter and more ruthless than either of us gave him credit for. Adrian's bitter laugh carried through the phone. Christ, the man I asked to investigate you was actually orchestrating your investigation of me. That's almost elegant. It's not elegant, it's devastating. Unless we stop him immediately, Edmund acquires enough shares to force a sale. Everything we've both built gets liquidated and sold for parts. What are you proposing? Temporary alliance. We stop fighting each other and focus on the actual threat. Edmund's vulnerable if we can prove conspiracy between him and Selena, proof that he intentionally planted her to create marital crisis, which requires Selena's cooperation or testimony, or her communications. Thomas can access her devices if we can locate her. I know where she is, still have tracking access to her phone from when we were together. Adrian paused. If we do this, if we work together, it doesn't absolve what I did, the affair, the poor judgment, the damage to our marriage. I'm not forgiving you, Adrian. I'm partnering with you to prevent mutual destruction. Those are different things. Understood. What do you need from me? They worked through the night. A Duchess and Duke, who'd spent 6 weeks trying to destroy each other, now focused on a common enemy. Adrian provided Selena's location, a hotel in Prague, apparently waiting for Edmund's next instruction. Thomas hacked her devices remotely, pulling months of communications. The evidence was devastating. Explicit discussions between Selena and Edmund about manipulating Adrian's emotions. Strategies for creating maximum marital conflict. Plans for timing revelations to cause most damage. Edmund had orchestrated everything down to which board members Vivian would approach, which evidence would seem most convincing, how to position himself as trusted advisor. He's been playing three-dimensional chess while we were playing checkers, Adrian said, reading through messages. He's been playing us both. The question is whether we can prove it in time to stop the acquisition. Marcus Webb arrived at 2 a.m. with corporate lawyers. They reviewed the evidence, built emergency motions to block Edmund's share purchases based on fraud and market manipulation. It was thin legally. Edmund's actions were unethical more than illegal, but might buy time. The real leverage is threatening to expose him publicly, Marcus said. Edmund's entire business model depends on reputation. If his corporate espionage tactics become known, he loses access to future targets. So we threaten mutually assured destruction, Vivian said. He backs away from Blackthorn Holdings, or we release everything showing his methodology. Assuming he cares more about future opportunities than this current acquisition, it was a gamble. But gambling was better than surrendering. At 7 a.m., Vivian and Adrian walked into Edmund's office unannounced. He looked surprised for exactly 3 seconds before recovering his composure. Duchess, Duke, this is unexpected. We know everything, Vivian said simply. Selena's real identity. Your communications with her. The 8-month plan to orchestrate marital crisis and devalue Blackthorn Holdings. Your acquisition offers to minority shareholders. Edmund smiled, unperturbed. I'm not sure what conspiracy theory you've constructed, but Adrian dropped a folder on Edmund's desk. That's 6 months of communications between you and Selena Volkov discussing manipulation strategies. Specific quotes include, make Adrian feel valued so he'll trust her financial advice. Ensure Vivian discovers the affair at maximum impact moment. Feed the Duchess evidence that's 70% true and 30% catastrophic. She'll investigate the true parts and overlook the fabrications. Shall I continue? The smile faltered slightly. Those communications are taken out of context. Context doesn't matter, Vivian said. What matters is how they'll look when released to every financial publication in Europe, along with analysis of your previous acquisitions. How many other families will recognize your pattern? How many will realize they were manipulated the same way? You're bluffing. Test us. Adrian's voice was cold. Release those documents and watch your business model collapse. Every wealthy family will know you use corporate espionage and planted operatives. You'll never work in legitimate finance again. Edmund studied them both, calculating. What do you want? Withdraw all acquisition offers for Blackthorn Holdings. Sign a document agreeing never to target our company or family members again. Do those things, and these communications stay private. And if I refuse? Then we go public. File criminal complaints for fraud and conspiracy, and make your life so legally complicated you'll spend years in court. You might win eventually, but the reputational damage will be permanent. Edmund was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a pen. I'll need the agreement drafted formally. Already done. Marcus produced documents. Sign here, here, and here. Edmund signed with visible frustration. You've won this round. Congratulations. We didn't win, Vivian said. We prevented you from winning. There's a difference. They left Edmund's office with signed agreements and the cold satisfaction of temporarily defeating someone who'd almost destroyed them both. In the car, Adrian broke the silence. That was extraordinary. The way you maneuvered him into surrender. We maneuvered. Together. He looked at her with something like wonder. I'd forgotten what we were like when we worked together, before everything fell apart. Don't romanticize it. We're not together. We're temporarily aligned against common threat. When this is over, we're still finished. I know. But Vivian, watching you operate these past 12 hours, I remembered why I fell in love with you. Not your beauty, your mind, your absolute refusal to be defeated even when defeat looked certain. That's not love, Adrian, that's admiration. And admiration isn't enough to rebuild what you destroyed. He nodded, accepting. What happens now? Now we rebuild Blackthorn Holdings properly. You sign majority control to me as offered. We divorce quietly. You maintain enough assets to live comfortably, but you're removed from operational decisions permanently. Agreed. And Selena? Selena disappears. I've already arranged her removal to somewhere without extradition treaties. She's gone from both our lives. You're extraordinary. Even in victory, you're strategic. I'm not victorious. I'm surviving. That's all anyone can do when they've been betrayed from every direction. The divorce papers were filed 3 days later. The investigation into Adrian's activities concluded with findings of poor judgment and questionable business practices, but no criminal charges. Dimitri's documentation had indeed shown the transactions were legal if badly executed. Edmund withdrew from London society, relocated to Switzerland, his reputation intact but his scheme exposed to those who mattered. Blackthorn Holdings remained under Vivian's control, diminished but viable. And Vivian sat in her study 6 months after everything collapsed, looking at legal documents that officially made her the owner of an empire she'd built twice, once as Duchess, once as divorcee. Thomas found her there. How do you feel? Empty, exhausted, victorious in ways that don't feel like victory. Edmund's gone. Adrian's neutered. You control the company. Those are wins. Are they? I won by discovering I'd been manipulated for months. By realizing everyone I trusted was either betraying me or preparing to. by becoming someone cold enough to threaten mutual destruction without flinching. She looked at her brother. I survived, but I'm not sure what survived is recognizable as the woman who started this. People change when circumstances demand it. That's what frightens me. How easy it was to become this person. How natural it felt to move from hurt to rage to calculated destruction. Adrian betrayed me, but I became someone capable of systematic revenge. Edmund manipulated me, but I learned to manipulate just as effectively. At what point does survival transform you into exactly what you're fighting against? Thomas sat beside her. You're asking whether you've lost yourself. I'm observing that I found myself. And what I found is someone ruthless enough to win wars by any means necessary. That's power. But I'm not sure it's worth what I sacrificed to gain it. What did you sacrifice? The belief that loyalty matters, that love is real, that people can be trusted to be who they claim to be. Every relationship now filtered through suspicion about ulterior motives, every alliance temporary until someone offers better terms. It's functional, it's exhausting, and it's apparently what success looks like when you strip away all comforting delusions. Vivian stood looking out over London. Adrian taught me trust is weakness. Edmund taught me appearances are manufactured. Dmitri taught me even criminals have codes they follow, while the supposedly honorable destroy you casually. And I've learned the most important lesson of all. Which is? That power isn't built on love or loyalty or any noble foundation. It's built on the willingness to do what others won't, to become what others fear, to sacrifice every soft part of yourself until only the weapon remains. She turned to face Thomas. I've won. I've survived. And I'll never be vulnerable again. But I'm also not entirely sure who I am anymore beyond someone who knows how to fight wars others didn't realize they'd started. It wasn't triumph, it was transformation. And Vivian Ashford stood in the ruins of who she'd been, looking at who she'd become, understanding finally that some victories change you so completely that winning and losing become indistinguishable. The phone call came at 3 a.m, the kind of hour when bad news wore its most honest face. Vivian was still awake, had been awake most nights since the Edmund situation resolved, her mind too sharp and too damaged to allow rest. She saw the unknown number and answered because at this point, what threat could possibly surprise her anymore? Thomas's voice came through tight with controlled panic. Adrian's in the hospital. Someone tried to kill him. The words landed without the impact they should have carried. Vivian felt herself processing information with the cold efficiency she'd developed over months of warfare. Analyzing threat vectors, calculating implications, identifying next moves. The part of her that might have felt fear or concern had been cauterized away by betrayal and survival. How bad is it? Bad. He's in surgery. Gunshot wound to the chest. Happened outside his club in Mayfair around midnight. Security cameras caught 2 men, professional execution style, but they disappeared before police arrived. Vivian was already dressing, phone wedged between shoulder and ear. Who knows about this? Just immediate family so far. Police are keeping it quiet while they investigate. But Viv, whoever did this wasn't random. This was targeted assassination. And if they wanted Adrian dead, there's a good chance you're on the same list. She'd already considered that possibility. Was already running through enemies capable of ordering hits. Edmund was bitter, but not murderous. Selena was exiled and powerless. Dmitry Kozlov had claimed alliance, but Russian oligarchs were exactly the kind of people who eliminated problems efficiently. Get Keller's team back on full security protocol. I'm going to the hospital. That's not safe. If this is coordinated, then they'll try, regardless of where I am. At least at the hospital, I'll know what I'm dealing with. The drive through pre-dawn London felt surreal. City lights reflecting off rain-slicked streets, while Vivian's mind catalogued possibilities. Adrian had made enemies during their war. So had she. The question was which enemy had decided quiet victory wasn't sufficient and wanted permanent removal. Keller met her at the hospital entrance with 3 of his team, all looking military-grade alert. Situation assessment. 2 shooters, professional-grade weapons, knew exactly where Duke Blackthorne would be and when. This wasn't crime of passion. This was contracted work. Russian connections, Vivian said. Not quite a question. Possibly. Or someone else with resources to hire competent killers. We're running security sweeps on your movements for the past week, checking if anyone's been establishing patterns on you. The ICU waiting area was sterile and fluorescent, populated by Adrian's family members Vivian hadn't seen since the divorce proceedings. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. His younger sister Catherine, different Catherine from Rothschild, was crying quietly in a corner. They all stopped and stared when Vivian entered. The woman who'd destroyed Adrian's reputation, ended their marriage, nearly sent him to prison. She could read the accusation in their faces even before anyone spoke. The Dowager Duchess stood with aristocratic rigidity that didn't quite hide her shaking hands. "You shouldn't be here. He's still my business partner. I have a right to information about threats to Blackthorn Holdings leadership." Business partner. Catherine spat the words like they tasted poisonous. "He's your husband. Was your husband. The man you tried to destroy because he made a mistake. He committed fraud and adultery. Those aren't mistakes, they're choices. And now someone's trying to kill him. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Right when you've taken control of everything he built." Vivian felt rage spark but kept her voice level. "If you're suggesting I hired assassins, you're stupider than your brother. His death doesn't benefit me. It complicates company ownership and triggers investigations I don't need." A doctor emerged before the confrontation could escalate, looking exhausted in the way trauma surgeons did after difficult cases. Duke Blackthorn survived surgery. The bullet missed his heart by centimeters, but caused significant internal damage. He's stable, but critical. Family can see him briefly, one at a time. The Dowager went first, emerging 10 minutes later looking haunted. Catherine went next. Then various cousins and distant relatives Vivian barely remembered. She waited through all of them, not because she wanted to see Adrian, but because leaving would look like guilt. When everyone else had finished, the doctor approached her. "He's been asking for you, specifically. Said it's urgent." Vivian followed him through sterile corridors to an ICU room that smelled like disinfectant and the particular metallic scent of recent trauma. Adrian lay connected to machines that monitored rhythms keeping him alive, his aristocratic features slack with morphine and exhaustion, his eyes open when she entered, struggling to focus. "You came. You asked for me. Thought you might not." "Given everything." His voice was rough, damaged. "Need to tell you something, in case I don't make it." Vivian pulled a chair close, keeping her expression neutral, even as something uncomfortable twisted in her chest. This man had betrayed her, used her, let his mistress plot her murder. But he was also the person she'd spent 6 years building a life with before everything shattered. "Who did this to you?" "Don't know for certain. But Vivian, I lied to you about the Russian connections, about how deep it went." His breathing was labored, each word costing effort. "Dmitry Kozlov. He wasn't just business associate. I was laundering money for him. Real laundering, not the legitimate investments he claimed. Been doing it for 5 years. Since before we married." The revelation should have shocked her. Instead, it just felt like confirmation of suspicions she'd been too tired to fully investigate. "Why tell me now?" "Because the laundering didn't stop when the investigation started. I kept doing it, kept moving his money even after everything collapsed. He threatened my family if I stopped. Said he'd target my mother, Catherine, everyone. So I continued in secret. Been using shell companies you don't know about." Vivian's tactical mind immediately calculated implications. If Adrian had kept laundering money without her knowledge, that meant she was potentially liable as company owner. Anything he'd done under Blackthorn Holdings' umbrella could expose her to criminal charges. What shell companies? Adrian rattled off names she didn't recognize, accounts established before their divorce. But the real problem is Dmitry thinks I've been skimming, taking percentages for myself. I'm not that stupid. But his auditors found discrepancies. Someone made it look like I'm stealing from him. Who would do that? Adrian's eyes met hers with something like desperate clarity. Only person who had access to the accounts and reason to want me dead. Edmund Carstairs. The name hit like physical impact. Edmund, who they'd defeated 6 months ago, who'd signed agreements to never target them again, who apparently hadn't finished playing his game. Edmund's working with Dmitry? Think bigger. Edmund didn't just manipulate us. He manipulated Dmitry too. Made it look like I'm stealing Russian money, knowing Dmitry would order a hit. That way Edmund gets rid of me, you become sole owner of a company about to face criminal investigation for money laundering, and Edmund swoops in to acquire assets during the legal chaos. Vivian felt cold recognition settle in her bones. Edmund hadn't been defeated. He'd retreated, regrouped, and launched a more sophisticated attack. One that used Russian assassins as weapons while maintaining plausible deniability. Where's the evidence of the altered accounts? Adrian gestured weakly toward his phone on the bedside table. In my secure files. Passwords are your birthday and our wedding anniversary. Ironic, I know. Everything's there. The real accounts, the doctored versions Edmund created, communications showing his manipulation. Why those passwords? Because, despite everything, despite all my mistakes, those were the two most important days of my life. The day I met the woman who made me believe I could be better than I was. And the day I promised her forever before I destroyed it. Vivian took the phone without responding to the sentiment. She didn't have energy for complicated feelings about Adrian's regrets. She needed information, evidence, weapons. If Dmitri ordered this hit on you, I'm probably next on his list. You are. But Vivian, listen. Edmund's plan requires you alive long enough to inherit my debts and legal liability. Then you'll have an accident too, and Blackthorn Holdings gets liquidated. He's timing this perfectly, taking out pieces one by one. So I have how long before he makes his move? Days. Maybe less. Adrian's eyes were closing, morphine pulling him under. You need to get ahead of this. Expose Edmund before he finishes what he started. Use the evidence in my phone. It's everything you need to prove he's orchestrated all of it. Vivian stood, pocketing the phone. One more question. Do you regret it? Everything that brought us here? Adrian's response was barely audible. Every day. But regret doesn't undo damage. Just teaches you what loss tastes like. His eyes opened one more time. Win this, Vivian. Not for me, for you. Because you're extraordinary and you deserve to survive long enough to realize it. She left without saying goodbye, emotions too complicated to process while her mind was already racing through next moves. Edmund had orchestrated a scenario where both she and Adrian would be eliminated by Russian assassins, making their deaths look like organized crime cleanup, while he positioned himself to acquire their assets legally. It was elegant, brutal, exactly the kind of multi-layered strategy she should have anticipated from someone who'd already proven himself capable of long-term manipulation. Thomas was waiting in the hospital corridor, reading her expression with sibling accuracy. Whatever Adrian told you, it's bad. Edmund's still playing. He made it look like Adrian stole from Dmitry Kozlov. The assassination attempt was Dmitry's retaliation. I'm next unless we expose Edmund first. How do we expose a man who's built plausible deniability into every move? We do what he wouldn't expect. We go directly to Dmitry and show him he's been manipulated. Turn the weapon back on the person wielding it. Thomas looked skeptical. Russian oligarchs aren't known for reasonable conversation when they think they've been stolen from, which is why we bring overwhelming proof. Adrian's phone has everything, the real accounts, the doctored versions. Evidence of Edmund's alterations. We show Dmitry he hasn't been robbed by Adrian. He's been played by Edmund. And if Dmitry doesn't believe us, then we die. But we were going to die anyway on Edmund's timeline. At least this way we're making aggressive moves instead of waiting for execution. They left the hospital under heavy security, Keller's team forming a protective perimeter that felt simultaneously necessary and surreal. 6 months ago, Vivian had been a Duchess at charity galas. Now she was traveling with armed guards to meet Russian criminals and prove she shouldn't be assassinated. The transformation should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like the only honest version of herself she'd ever been. Someone who understood power came from willingness to fight wars others wouldn't even acknowledge existed. Dmitry Kozlov maintained a residence in Belgravia, the kind of property that cost £30 million and looked like a fortress disguised as elegant townhouse. Vivian called ahead from a burner phone, knowing Dmitry would have her regular number monitored. We need to meet. I have information about who actually stole from you. Dmitry's response was cold. I know who stole from me. He's currently in hospital recovering from my response. You're wrong. And I can prove it. Give me 1 hour. If you're not convinced, you can add me to your list of problems to eliminate. Silence while he calculated. Then, 1 hour. Come alone, or my men will assume hostile intent. She's not coming alone, Thomas said immediately after she hung up. That's suicide. I'm coming without visible security. You and Keller can position outside, but I'm walking in alone. Dmitry needs to see confidence, not fear. The meeting was set for 11 a.m. at Dimitri's Belgravia residence. Vivian spent the intervening hours downloading everything from Adrian's phone: account records, communications, forensic analysis showing where Edmund had altered numbers to create appearance of theft. The evidence was comprehensive if you knew what to look for. The question was whether Dimitri would see it or just see a desperate woman trying to avoid consequences. She dressed in a navy suit that conveyed authority without aggression, wore minimal jewelry, carried only the tablet containing evidence. Thomas drove her to Belgravia, with Keller's team following in separate vehicles, establishing perimeter positions around Dimitri's residence. "You don't have to do this," Thomas said as they parked 3 blocks away. "We could go to authorities with the evidence instead. Authorities take time we don't have. Dimitri moves fast. If I'm going to redirect his violence away from me and toward Edmund, it has to happen now. And if he decides you're lying, if he thinks this is an elaborate setup, then you inherit Blackthorn Holdings and hopefully learn from my mistakes about trusting people's capacity for reason." She walked the final blocks alone, aware of security cameras tracking her movement, aware that somewhere in that elegant building men with guns were watching her approach. The front door opened before she reached it. 2 men in expensive suits that didn't hide their security role, gesturing her inside without speaking. The interior was beautiful in the way oligarch properties tended to be. Art worth millions displayed casually, furnishings that cost more than cars, everything designed to communicate wealth and power. Dimitri waited in a study lined with books she suspected he'd never read, sitting behind a desk positioned to make visitors feel subordinate. Duchess Blackthorn. "You have 1 hour to convince me why you should continue living." Vivian set her tablet on his desk, pulled up the first document. "Because I'm not your enemy. Edmund Carstairs is. And I can prove he's stolen from you while framing my ex-husband." She walked him through the evidence methodically. Original account records showing accurate transactions. Doctored versions with discrepancies making it appear Adrian had skimmed percentages. Digital forensics proving when alterations were made and from what IP addresses. Communications between Edmund and unknown parties discussing timeline for implementing the fraud. Dimitri watched without expression, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated he understood financial manipulation better than most legitimate bankers. Why would Edmund do this? What does he gain from making me kill Adrian Blackthorn? Control of Blackthorn Holdings. Adrian dead looks like organized crime cleanup. I inherit the company along with massive legal liability from hidden money laundering operations. Then I have an accident too, also looking like mob-related elimination. Blackthorn Holdings gets liquidated, assets sold at distressed prices. Edmund's positioned to acquire everything he wanted at fraction of actual value. Dimitri leaned back, fingers steepled. Elegant plan. Using me as weapon while maintaining distance from actual violence. I appreciate the sophistication even as I dislike being manipulated. Then help me stop him. You don't benefit from being Edmund's tool. You benefit from eliminating the person actually stealing from you. And how do you propose we eliminate Edmund Carstairs? Vivian had anticipated this question, had spent the drive here considering options. We expose him publicly with evidence he can't deny or explain away. We show the financial community he's been running corporate espionage operations for years. We make him toxic to every legitimate business relationship he has. And we let him know that you know what he did, which should encourage him to disappear permanently rather than risk your direct retaliation. Dimitri smiled, sharp and dangerous. You're suggesting I frighten him away rather than kill him. I'm suggesting you make him understand that stealing from you has consequences beyond immediate violence, that you're more dangerous as ongoing threat than one-time execution. Edmund's smart. He'll run rather than spend his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for you to decide he's worth eliminating. Why should I show mercy to someone who used me as weapon against innocent parties? Because mercy that comes with reputation damage is worse than death for someone like Edmund. He needs credibility to operate. Take that away and he's finished in ways assassination wouldn't accomplish. And because I'm asking you to, which should count for something given I just walked into your house alone knowing you'd recently ordered a hit on my family. Dimitri studied her with what might have been respect. You're either extraordinarily brave or suicidally stupid. I haven't decided which. I've spent 6 months learning there's no functional difference between those things. Bravery is just stupidity that occasionally succeeds. He laughed, genuine amusement breaking through oligarch coldness. I see why Adrian married you. You're wasted on legitimate business. You should be running criminal enterprises. You have the mentality for it. I'm flattered and horrified in equal measure. Do we have an agreement? We have an agreement. Edmund Carstairs faces exposure and my displeasure rather than immediate execution. In exchange, you and Adrian stay out of my business permanently. No more money laundering, no more connections, completely separate operations. Done. And the hit on Adrian gets canceled. Consider it canceled. Dmitri stood, extending his hand. Though I suggest your ex-husband invest in better security. My men may stand down, but Edmund might have contingency plans. Vivian shook his hand, sealing an alliance with a criminal that felt more trustworthy than half the legitimate business relationships she'd maintained. Because at least Dmitri was honest about being dangerous. The walk back to Thomas's car felt different than the approach. Lighter, somehow. Despite knowing she'd just negotiated with someone who ordered murders casually. She'd redirected assassination away from herself and Adrian, turned Dmitri's violence toward the person who actually deserved it, and potentially ended Edmund's career in one meeting. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like survival. Thomas read her expression when she got in the car. It worked? It worked. Dmitri's calling off the hit and going after Edmund instead. We're clear. Then why do you look like you just lost something? Because I did. Whatever remaining illusions I had about solving problems through legitimate channels, I just made an alliance with a criminal to threaten another criminal into submission. That's not how functional societies operate. Functional societies didn't try to have you killed. You did what was necessary. Necessary. Vivian stared out the window as London passed by. That's the word people use when they've become something they never intended to be. When survival requires compromising every principle they thought they stood for. You sound like you regret it. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that I'm apparently very good at operating in spaces where normal rules don't apply. I regret that the woman I was a year ago would be horrified by the woman I've become. Thomas drove in silence for several blocks. For what it's worth, I think the woman you've become is stronger than the woman you were. Stronger and lonelier. Strength purchased with trust is expensive. Vivian closed her eyes. But we're not done. Edmund still needs to be exposed publicly. Dmitri's threat handles immediate danger, but we need permanent solution. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we use the annual shareholders meeting. Blackthorn Holdings has its biggest gathering in 3 days. Every major investor, board member, financial reporter in London will be there. We present evidence of Edmund's corporate espionage tactics in front of everyone he needs to impress. Make it impossible for him to rebuild credibility. That's publicly humiliating a man who's proven himself dangerous. He might retaliate. Let him try. At that point, he'll be facing both me and Dmitri Kozlov's displeasure. Even Edmund's not stupid enough to continue fighting when he's completely outmatched. They spent the next 2 days preparing a presentation that would destroy Edmund Carstairs without technically committing slander. Everything documented, everything provable, everything presented as concern about corporate governance standards rather than personal vendetta. Adrian was released from hospital under heavy security, still weak but alive. He and Vivian maintained careful distance, communicating through lawyers and assistants, neither quite ready to address the complicated feelings created by shared near-death experiences. The annual shareholders meeting convened in a conference center that could hold 800 people. Every seat was filled. Word had spread that something significant was planned, and London's financial elite never missed potential scandal. Vivian stood backstage with Thomas, checking notes one final time. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. Everything she'd learned about performing under pressure compressed into this moment. You ready? Thomas asked. I'm terrified, which means I'm perfectly ready. The introduction was handled by Peter Thornton, the CFO who'd supported her through the board restructuring. When he announced Vivian would be presenting special information regarding corporate security practices, the room went silent with anticipation. Vivian walked onto the stage in a crimson suit that made her look like controlled fire. She didn't smile. Didn't perform warmth, just pure authority as she activated the presentation screens. Good morning. I'm here to discuss a threat to our industry that goes beyond typical competition. I'm talking about systematic corporate espionage designed to manufacture crises that devalue companies for acquisition purposes. She walked them through Edmund's methodology without naming him initially. how consultants could be planted to gain trust, how mistresses could be introduced to create marital chaos, how evidence could be manipulated to make legitimate business owners look criminal. The audience was riveted, recognizing tactics that had probably been used against some of them. Then she named Edmund Carstairs specifically, pulling up communications proving he'd run this operation against Blackthorn Holdings, showing his previous targets in Germany and Switzerland, demonstrating pattern of behavior that should concern every family business in Europe. Edmund was in the audience. She'd made sure he received invitation, knowing his ego wouldn't let him miss Blackthorn Holdings' annual meeting. She watched his face go from confident to pale as evidence accumulated on screen. He stood abruptly, moving toward exits, but security she'd positioned blocked his path. "Mr. Carstairs, you're welcome to stay and address these allegations publicly." Edmund's expression was venomous. "This is defamation. I'll sue you for everything." "Then sue. Everything I've presented is documented truth, but I suspect you won't pursue legal action because that would require a discovery process where even more of your operations get exposed." Vivian's voice was steel. "You're finished in London, finished in any legitimate business community, and if you're smart, you'll leave Britain entirely before certain other parties I've shared this information with decide you're worth their attention." The threat was clear to anyone who understood how oligarchs handled betrayal. Edmund understood immediately. His face registered the realization that Dmitry Kozlov now knew he'd been manipulated. He left the conference center without responding, security partying to let him through. The room erupted in whispered conversations, board members and investors processing implications. Vivian concluded her presentation with calm authority. "Blackthorn Holdings has survived a systematic attack designed to destroy us. We've emerged stronger and more vigilant. I want each of you to understand that this company, under my leadership, does not tolerate manipulation. We don't forgive betrayal, and we will always, always fight to protect what we've built." The applause was deafening, not because she was likable, she'd stopped trying to be likable months ago, but because she demonstrated strength. In their world, strength was the only currency that mattered. Adrian was waiting backstage when she came off, leaning heavily on a cane but standing on his own. That was extraordinary. That was necessary. He nodded, accepting the distinction. "Vivian, I know things between us are broken beyond repair, but I need you to know something. The woman you became through all this, the strong, ruthless, brilliant strategist who just destroyed her enemy in front of 800 witnesses, that's who I always saw in you. I just didn't have the courage to let you be her. Maybe that's why we failed. You wanted a Duchess who enhanced your image. I needed a partner who could match my ambition. I know." Adrian's smile was sad. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the affair or the fraud. For wasting 6 years of your life on someone too weak to deserve you." Vivian felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of release. "We both made mistakes. You just made more catastrophic ones." Fair assessment. He straightened as much as his injuries allowed. "What happens now? With us. Now we finalize the divorce. You maintain minimal involvement in Blackthorn Holdings as figurehead. I run operations completely. We're cordial in public and strangers in private. Eventually, we'll both move on to lives that don't include each other." That sounds lonely. It sounds like survival. And right now, survival is my only relationship goal. Adrian left without arguing, understanding finally that some damage created permanent distance. Thomas found her an hour later in the executive offices, staring out at London from windows that now overlooked territory she'd fought for and won. Edmonds fled the country. Private jet to Dubai 20 minutes after the presentation ended. Looks like he's not planning to return. Good. One less threat to monitor. Dmitry sent a message too. Says to tell you he respects your tactical mind, and if you ever tire of legitimate business, he has opportunities available. Please tell me you're joking. Dead serious. Apparently oligarchs recruit from the ruthless Duchess demographic. Vivian laughed despite everything, the sound strange after months of careful control. I've become someone Russian criminals try to hire. That's either triumph or tragedy depending on perspective. It's both. Like everything else about this situation. They stood together watching the city, siblings who'd survived warfare that most people would never believe occurred behind aristocratic smiles in corporate boardrooms. Thomas broke the silence. What are you going to do now? You've won. Edmund's gone. Adrian's neutralized. Dimitri's no longer a threat. Blackthorn Holdings is secure. What does victory actually look like for you? The question hung in the air, complicated by the fact that Vivian had spent so long fighting that she'd forgotten what she was fighting for beyond survival. I don't know. Build the company into something that can't be threatened again. Establish security protocols that prevent future infiltration. Maybe eventually figure out who I am when I'm not at war. You could date, rebuild personal life. Try to find something besides business success. Date. Vivian's laugh was bitter. What kind of relationship could I possibly have? Trust someone enough to let them close after everyone I trusted betrayed me? That sounds exhausting. Not everyone betrays. Everyone who had access did. Adrian, Edmund, Selena. Even you violated some laws helping me fight back. The only person I can completely trust is myself. And honestly, sometimes I'm suspicious of her motivations too. That's not sustainable, Viv. You can't live like Fortress indefinitely. Watch me. But even as she said it, Vivian felt the weight of isolation she'd constructed. Safety purchased with permanent distance from anything resembling genuine connection. It was functional. It was survivable. It was possibly the saddest victory condition she could imagine. Her phone rang. Hospital. She answered with immediate tension. Duchess Blackthorn? This is Dr. Matthews from UCL Hospital. Duke Blackthorn has taken a turn for the worse. Internal bleeding from complications. We need to operate immediately, but he's listed you as next of kin for medical decisions. We need your authorization. The irony was almost perfect. Adrian had betrayed her, nearly destroyed her, forced her to become someone unrecognizable. And now his life depended on her willingness to authorize surgery. Do whatever's necessary to save him. Cost is irrelevant. She hung up and stood frozen, understanding finally that rage and hurt didn't actually erase history. That 6 years of marriage, even terrible marriage, created bonds that survival instinct couldn't completely sever. What's wrong? Thomas saw her expression. Adrian's dying. Maybe. They need to operate again. I just authorized them to do whatever it takes. You still care about him. I care about not having his death on my conscience. There's a difference. Is there? Vivian didn't answer because she wasn't entirely sure. The woman she'd become could calculate strategic advantage and execute ruthless plans without hesitation. But underneath all that armor, some damaged part of her still remembered loving Adrian before he destroyed everything. They drove back to the hospital through afternoon traffic that felt surreal given the morning's triumph. She'd just demolished her enemy in front of London's financial elite. And now she was racing to make sure her ex-husband didn't die from complications of an assassination attempt she'd helped prevent. The ICU waiting room was empty this time. Adrian's family apparently hadn't been notified yet. Vivian sat in the same uncomfortable chair she'd occupied days earlier, waiting while surgeons fought to repair damage from Russian bullets and internal bleeding. Thomas sat beside her in solidarity. You know this isn't your fault. Whatever happens to Adrian, I know, but knowing and feeling are different things. Hours passed. Vivian refused coffee, refused food, just sat processing the strange mathematics of caring about someone she also hated. Adrian had betrayed her systematically, but he'd also been her partner for 6 years. Had been the person she'd built dreams with before reality destroyed them. The contradictions were exhausting. Dr. Matthews emerged at 7 p.m. looking cautiously optimistic. He's stable. We stopped the bleeding and repaired additional damage. He should recover fully with time. The relief Vivian felt was disproportionate to someone she claimed to hate. Thank you. He's asking for you again. Says it's important. Against better judgment, Vivian followed the doctor to Adrian's room. He looked worse than before, paler, weaker, hollowed out by trauma and surgery. You came back. You're still my responsibility, apparently, even divorced. Adrian's smile was faint. I heard about the shareholders' meeting. Thomas sent me video while I was being prepped for surgery. You destroyed Edmund publicly. It was beautiful. It was necessary. Why do you always say that? As if everything you do is just survival strategy rather than choice. Because I'm not sure I'm capable of choosing anything except survival anymore. Everything else got burned out of me. Adrian was quiet for a moment. I destroyed something in you. The version of Vivian who believed in love and partnership and all those idealistic things we promised each other. I'm sorry for that. More than the affair, more than the fraud. I'm sorry for killing the woman you were. The words landed with unexpected weight. Vivian found herself sitting in the chair beside his bed without consciously deciding to. You didn't kill her alone. I participated. I chose to become this person rather than stay vulnerable. That's on me as much as you. Do you regret it? Becoming this version of yourself? Every day. And never. Vivian met his eyes directly. I regret what it cost, but I'm alive and powerful in ways I never was as your decorative Duchess. So it's complicated. Most worthwhile things are. While they sat in silence that felt less hostile than usual. Two people who destroyed each other learning to exist in the same space without immediate warfare. What happens after this? Adrian asked. After I recover and the divorce finalizes and we're officially done with each other? I don't know. I've been so focused on surviving the next threat that I haven't thought about what life looks like when threats stop coming. Maybe that's what you should focus on now. Building something instead of defending something. Vivian considered it. Building felt impossible when her default mode had become fortress defense. But maybe that was the next transformation, learning to create rather than just prevent destruction. I'll think about it. After you're recovered and Edmund's truly gone, and I've established security protocols that mean I can sleep without worrying about assassination attempts. Adrian laughed weakly. So in about 5 years. Optimistically. She stood to leave, but Adrian caught her hand with surprising strength. Vivian, thank you. For authorizing the surgery, for preventing Dmitri from finishing his hit, for not letting me die even though I would have deserved it. You wouldn't have deserved it. You're terrible husband and unethical businessman, but that doesn't warrant execution. She squeezed his hand briefly before releasing it. Recover. Build whatever life you can from what's left. And maybe someday we'll both forgive ourselves for what we became trying to survive each other. She left before emotion could complicate the moment further. Outside the hospital, London was dark and cold. November wind cutting through her jacket. Vivian stood on the steps, looking at the city she'd fought to keep her place in, wondering what victory actually meant now that she'd achieved it. Thomas appeared beside her. Where to now? Home. Real home. Not the townhouse or the manor. Somewhere that's just mine without history of what I've lost. You planning to buy new property? I'm planning to figure out who Vivian Ashford is when she's not at war. Who I am without enemies to destroy or empires to protect. It's terrifying. Most worthwhile things are. She smiled at him, echoing Adrian's words. When did you become wise? Somewhere between hacking Russian oligarch communications and helping my sister negotiate with assassins. Trauma builds character, apparently. They drove through London toward uncertain future, Vivian's mind already cataloging next steps. Finalize divorce. Restructure Blackthorn Holdings. Establish true independence. Possibly, eventually, figure out if she was capable of relationships that didn't end in betrayal and mutual destruction. But first, tonight. She just needed to sit in silence and acknowledge she'd survived. Had won. Had become someone powerful enough to defeat every enemy while losing parts of herself she wasn't sure she wanted back. The phone call came as they approached Knightsbridge. Unknown number again. Vivian answered warily. Duchess Blackthorn. A woman's voice, accented and unfamiliar. We haven't met, but we have mutual interests. I represent parties who are very interested in your recent conflict with Edmund Carstairs. We'd like to discuss potential partnership. Who is this? Someone who recognizes exceptional talent when they see it. You've demonstrated remarkable strategic capability. There are people who value those skills and would compensate appropriately for consulting services. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling, offering opportunity. You've spent months fighting defensive battles. We're proposing you consider offensive ones. Corporate intelligence, strategic consulting, the kind of work that leverages your newly developed expertise. Vivian felt cold recognition. You're recruiting me to do exactly what Edmund did. Corporate espionage. We prefer to call it strategic consulting. But yes, essentially, you've proven yourself capable. Why waste that capability on legitimate business when you could be compensated significantly better for work you're apparently quite good at? The offer was simultaneously flattering and horrifying. 6 months of warfare had transformed her into someone criminal. Enterprises tried to recruit. I'm not interested. Vivian's voice was ice. I became this person to survive, not to weaponize my trauma for profit. Pity. You'd be extraordinary at it. The woman paused. The offer remains open if you change your mind. You know how to reach people like us now. And Duchess, we're always watching talented individuals, whether you work with us or not. The line disconnected. Vivian sat holding her phone, understanding with perfect clarity that survival had brought her to a precipice. She could continue the path toward becoming someone criminal organizations recruited, or she could choose differently, find a way to be powerful without being weaponized. Thomas had heard the conversation. Please tell me you're not considering that. I'm considering that I've reached a decision point. The woman I've become can either keep evolving towards something genuinely dangerous, or she can stop and rebuild into something better. Vivian looked at her brother. I don't want to be the person criminals try to hire, even if I'd be good at it. Then don't be. Choose differently. You've spent months reacting to other people's moves. Maybe it's time to decide who you want to be instead of just surviving what they make you become. The wisdom was simple but profound. Vivian had been so focused on defense and retaliation that she'd lost sight of agency, of choosing her transformation rather than just letting it happen. Take me to Blackthorn Manor. Not the townhouse. The manor. You sure? That place has a lot of bad memories. It also has 6 years of history, good and bad. I need to face it before I can move forward. They drove through cold November night to the Gothic mansion where Vivian's marriage had crumbled. The building loomed dark against darker sky, every window reminding her of dreams that had died behind them. She walked through empty rooms that still held furniture but no life. The study where she'd found Selena's letter. The ballroom where she'd smiled through humiliation at charity galas. The bedroom where Adrian had stopped touching her while pretending everything was fine. Thomas followed silently, letting her process. Vivian ended in the library, the one room she'd truly loved. Floor-to-ceiling books, leather chairs by the fireplace, windows overlooking gardens she'd designed. This space held good memories. Late nights reading while Adrian worked, morning coffee while planning strategies, moments of peace before everything shattered. This room I keep. Everything else can burn. Metaphorically or literally? Haven't decided yet. She sat in her favorite chair feeling the weight of 6 months pressing down. The woman who'd sat here last winter wouldn't recognize the woman sitting here now. That woman had believed in love and partnership and fixing broken things. This woman knew better. But maybe, possibly, eventually this woman could learn new things beyond survival and retaliation. Could build something that wasn't just fortress defense against inevitable betrayal. It felt like possibility. Terrifying and distant, but possible. Her phone buzzed one more time. Marcus Webb, her solicitor. Vivian, we have a problem. Edmund Carstairs just filed multiple lawsuits from Dubai. Defamation, tortious interference, about 15 other claims. He's also claiming you threatened him with criminal associates. This is going to be extensive litigation. Vivian laughed, surprising herself with genuine amusement. Of course he did. Of course this isn't over. Why would anything ever actually be finished? You don't sound concerned. I'm exhausted, Marcus. But Edmund's lawsuits from Dubai while running from Russian oligarch displeasure? That's desperate last move from someone who's already lost. File countersuits. I have documentation proving everything I said publicly was true. He'll spend his exile fighting legal battles he can't win while I rebuild the life he tried to destroy. You're certain? I'm certain that I've survived worse than Edmund Carstairs' wounded pride. Let him sue. Let him rage from whatever corner of the world he's hiding in. I'm done being afraid of men who mistake my capacity for kindness as weakness. She hung up and stood, looking around the library one last time. Thomas was watching her carefully. What are you thinking? I'm thinking this is the moment where I decide what kind of person I become next. The world is trying to make me into a weapon. Adrian made me ruthless. Edmund made me paranoid. Dimitri showed me how criminals operate. That recruiting call proved I could walk that path if I chose. But you're not going to. No. Because becoming what I fought against doesn't honor what I survived. It just means they won differently. So what do you become instead? Vivian considered the question with the full weight of everything she'd endured. I become someone who's powerful without being cruel. someone who learned hard lessons about trust and betrayal, but didn't let those lessons destroy her capacity for human connection. Someone who can be strategic and ruthless when necessary, but chooses those moments carefully rather than making them her entire identity. She turned to face Thomas. I become the woman I was supposed to be before Adrian and Edmund and all of this, just wiser, scarier, and significantly harder to destroy. That sounds like the beginning of something good, or the beginning of the next war I don't see coming. But either way, I'm making the choice consciously. I'm deciding my transformation instead of just reacting to other people's violence. They left Blackthorn Manor with Vivian knowing she'd never live there again. That chapter was finished, not closed neatly, but ended definitively. What came next was uncertain, probably difficult, possibly beautiful if she could figure out how to build instead of just defend. The drive back to London felt different than any journey she'd taken in the past 6 months. Not safe exactly, but no longer immediately threatened. The space between survival and actual living. Her phone stayed quiet. No assassination threats, no betrayals, no revelations that someone she trusted was actually destroying her. Just silence and the soft sound of London at night, and the beginning of understanding that maybe, possibly, she could stop fighting long enough to figure out what she actually wanted from life beyond just making it through another day. Thomas glanced at her. You okay? Vivian considered the question honestly. I'm traumatized and paranoid and probably going to need years of therapy. But I'm alive. I won. And I'm starting to think that might be enough foundation to build something real on. That's the most hopeful thing you've said in months. Don't get used to it. I'm still prepared for everything to explode again. But until it does, I'm going to try something radical. Which is living like someone who survived hell and earned the right to do more than just survive. The city lights blurred past the window, London in all its complicated beauty. Vivian leaned back, closed her eyes, and for the first time in 6 months felt something almost like peace. It wouldn't last. Peace never did in her experience, but for tonight, for this moment, it was enough to know she'd made it through the worst and emerged as someone recognizable. Not the naive Duchess she'd been, not the pure weapon she'd almost become, but something new and undefined and entirely her own. And then her phone rang one more time. Adrian's sister Catherine, voice tight with panic. Vivian, Adrian's coding. The doctors say he's not responding. They need you to make decisions about life support if he doesn't stabilize. You need to come back right now. The moment shattered. Peace evaporated. Whatever tentative future Vivian had been imagining replaced immediately with medical crisis and impossible decisions and the recognition that nothing was ever actually finished. She looked at Thomas, her expression communicating everything. He was already turning the car around, racing back toward the hospital through streets that had seemed beautiful moments ago and now just felt like obstacles between her and another catastrophic choice she'd have to make. Because apparently survival meant this: constant readiness for the next disaster, the next threat, the next impossible decision about life and death, and responsibility for someone who'd destroyed her but whose life she still held in her hands. The hospital loomed ahead, all harsh lights, and sterile promise of more trauma. Vivian prepared herself to walk back into hell one more time, wondering how many times a person could survive breaking before they just stayed broken. But she went anyway, because that's what survivors did. They kept going even when going seemed impossible. They survived one more crisis and then another, until survival became their entire identity, and they forgot what they were surviving for beyond just making it through to the next disaster. And somewhere in that endless cycle of crisis and resolution and more crisis, the woman Vivian Ashford could have become faded into the woman she had to be to keep surviving. The hospital doors opened before her like judgment, and Vivian walked through them into whatever came next, knowing only that it would be terrible and she would survive it because survival was the only thing she knew how to do anymore. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly under fluorescent lights that turned everything the color of desperation. Vivian's heels echoed against linoleum as she ran toward the ICU, Thomas struggling to keep pace behind her. Her mind cataloged worst-case scenarios with the ruthless efficiency she'd developed over months of crisis. Adrian dying, Adrian brain-damaged, Adrian surviving but permanently altered in ways that made her responsible for someone she could neither love nor abandon. Catherine met them at the ICU entrance, Mascara streaked down her face in patterns that mapped grief's geography. They got him stabilized. Barely. But Vivian, the doctor says his body can't take much more. The next crisis will probably kill him. Vivian felt something twist in her chest. Not quite the pain of loving someone, but the heavier ache of being bound to another person's mortality by history and guilt and 6 years of shared existence. She'd spent months wishing Adrian would disappear from her life. Now facing the actual possibility of his death, she discovered her rage was more complicated than simple hatred. "Can I see him?" Catherine nodded, wiping her face with hands that trembled. "He's been asking for you. Keeps saying he needs to tell you something before it's too late." The ICU room smelled like antiseptic and the particular metallic scent of a body fighting to continue existing. Adrian lay connected to machines that beeped urgent rhythms, his aristocratic features slack with exhaustion that went beyond physical. He looked like someone who'd survived a war but couldn't remember why he'd been fighting. His eyes opened when Vivian entered, struggling to focus. "You came back." His voice was barely audible over the machines. "Thought maybe you decided it was easier if I just died. Don't be dramatic. I've put too much effort into keeping you alive to quit now." A ghost of his old smile. Always practical. Even at deathbeds. "You're not dying. The doctors stabilized you. This time." Adrian's breathing was labored, each word costing visible effort. "But we both know I'm running out of times. Body can't keep recovering from assassination attempts and surgical complications indefinitely." Vivian pulled the chair closer, sitting at his bedside with the strange intimacy of two people who'd destroyed each other, learning to exist in the same fragile space. "Then don't have any more crises. Recover properly this time. Need to tell you something first, in case I don't get another chance." Adrian's hand moved weakly toward hers. "I've been lying to you. About why I really married you." The confession hung between them, heavy with implications Vivian wasn't sure she wanted to explore. "We married because your family needed money and mine had it. Because you needed strategic intelligence and I was brilliant. I know the transactional foundation, Adrian. You don't need to prettify it now. That's what I let you think. But the truth?" Adrian's eyes held hers with painful honesty. "The truth is I married you because you terrified me. Because you were smarter than me and more strategic, and I knew if I didn't bind myself to you legally, you'd eventually see through me completely." Marriage was self-preservation disguised as partnership. Vivian absorbed the words, feeling something crack open inside her. "You married me because you were afraid of me. I married you because I recognized that you were always going to be more powerful than me. And men like me, weak men pretending it's strength, we don't handle that recognition well. So I trapped you in a role where your power served me instead of threatening me. Made you Duchess, so you'd waste your brilliance building my empire instead of your own." The honesty was devastating, not because it revealed something new, but because it named what Vivian had suspected for years without admitting to herself. Her entire marriage had been a cage disguised as partnership, Adrian using legal and social structures to contain someone he couldn't match intellectually. "Why tell me this now? Because you deserve to know. And because I need you to understand that everything that happened afterward, Selena, the fraud, the betrayals, it all flowed from that original sin. I didn't trust you because I never believed I deserved you. So I sabotaged us both rather than admit I'd married someone fundamentally better than me." Vivian sat in silence, processing 6 years of marriage through this new lens. All the moments Adrian had diminished her contributions, all the times he'd taken credit for her work, all the subtle ways he'd positioned her as ornament rather than equal. None of it had been accidental. It had all been systematic containment of someone whose potential frightened him. "You could have just divorced me. Let me go build my own empire. And admit failure publicly? Acknowledge that a woman was smarter than a duke?" Adrian's bitter laugh dissolved into coughing. My pride couldn't handle it. So instead I destroyed both of us slowly while pretending it was love. It wasn't all pretending. Vivian heard herself defending what they'd had, despite knowing it had been fundamentally broken. There were moments of genuine partnership, times when we worked together and created something real. Moments. But moments don't constitute a marriage. Adrian's hand finally reached hers, gripping with surprising strength. "I loved you, Vivian, in whatever broken way I'm capable of loving. But I love my ego more, my title more, my need to feel superior more. And that's why we failed. Not because you weren't enough, because I couldn't handle how much you were. The machines beeped steady rhythm while Vivian sat with this truth. Her marriage had been doomed from the beginning, not by incompatibility, but by Adrian's fundamental inability to accept partnership with someone more capable. And she'd spent 6 years trying to make it work anyway, dimming her own light to make his ego feel less threatened. What do you want from me now? Forgiveness? No. Adrian's eyes were closing, exhaustion pulling him under. Just wanted you to know the truth, that you deserved better from the beginning. That the woman you became fighting me, ruthless and strategic and terrifying, that's who you always were. I just spent 6 years trying to suppress it. And I'm sorry. For all of it. For wasting your potential and your time and your capacity for trust. He fell asleep before Vivian could respond, leaving her sitting in the antiseptic silence, holding truths she'd never asked for but somehow needed. Thomas found her there an hour later, still sitting beside Adrian's bed. You going to make it? Probably. Unfortunately. Vivian stood, releasing Adrian's hand. He just gave me a deathbed confession about why our marriage was fundamentally broken. Apparently he married me because I terrified him and he needed to contain my power. That's the most honest thing I've ever heard him say. It's also the cruelest, because now I have to process 6 years through the lens of knowing I was deliberately diminished by someone too weak to partner with strength. Vivian walked to the window, looking out at London beginning to wake. I thought I was building an empire with my husband. Turns out I was building an empire for my jailer. What are you going to do with that information? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. Vivian pressed her forehead against cold glass. Part of me wants to rage at him for wasting 6 years of my life. Part of me just feels exhausted by how predictable it all was. Weak man marries strong woman and spends their marriage trying to cut her down to manageable size. It's a story as old as patriarchy itself. You're not responsible for his weakness. I know. But I'm responsible for staying in a situation that diminished me, for not recognizing what was happening and walking away years earlier. Vivian turned to face Thomas. That's what I keep circling back to. Adrian trapped me, but I stayed trapped. Even my brilliance couldn't save me from believing I needed to make the marriage work. You believed in commitment. That's not weakness. It is when commitment becomes complicity in your own diminishment. They left the hospital as dawn broke over London, the city waking to a day that would be ordinary for most people and transformative for Vivian. She drove through familiar streets, seeing them differently, not as territory she'd fought to claim, but as landscape she'd always had right to inhabit without needing anyone's permission. The townhouse felt different when she entered it. Still fortified, still secured by Keller's team, but no longer just a defensive position. It was becoming something that might eventually feel like home rather than bunker. She spent the day dismantling emergency protocols that were no longer necessary. Edmund was exiled and legally neutered. Dmitri was satisfied the real thief had been identified. Adrian was too damaged physically to pose threat. The immediate dangers had passed, leaving Vivian in the strange position of having to figure out what life looked like without constant warfare. Marcus Webb called at noon with updates on Edmund's lawsuits. His legal position is weaker than expected. The documentation you presented at the shareholders' meeting is all verified accurate. His defamation claims have no merit. I expect most of this gets dismissed within 3 months. And the threat about me involving criminal associates? He'd have to prove it, which means admitting he knows about Dmitry Kozlov's operations. That opens him to his own criminal liability. It's an empty threat from a desperate man. So it's really over. Edmund's finished. He's finished in London. Whether he's finished globally depends on how thoroughly he's burned bridges. But yes, Vivian, this particular war is over. You won. The words should have brought satisfaction. Instead, they just brought awareness of emptiness where conflict used to live. Vivian had structured her entire existence around surviving threats. Now she had to learn how to exist without them. Catherine Rothschild invited her to lunch at an exclusive Mayfair restaurant where aristocracy went to be seen being discreet. Vivian arrived to find Catherine already seated, 2 glasses of wine waiting. To surviving, Catherine said, raising her glass. You've had quite a year. That's diplomatic phrasing for I've publicly destroyed my husband and defeated corporate espionage while making alliance with Russian criminals. Catherine laughed. I was trying to be polite. But yes, you've had the kind of year that would break most people. Yet here you sit, intact and victorious. I'm not sure intact is accurate. Vivian sipped wine that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I'm functional. There's a difference. Fair distinction. Catherine studied her with aristocratic assessment. What are you going to do now? You have full control of Blackthorn Holdings. Adrian's neutralized. Edmund's exiled. You've won everything you fought for. What comes after victory? The question everyone kept asking. Vivian was beginning to suspect she didn't have an answer they'd find satisfactory. I rebuild. Make Blackthorn Holdings into something that can't be infiltrated or destroyed. Establish protocols that prevent future vulnerability. Focus on business growth without personal distraction. That sounds exhausting and lonely. It sounds safe. And right now, safety is more appealing than any alternative. Catherine leaned forward, voice dropping to confidential. Can I give you advice you didn't ask for? From someone who's been in London society longer than you? Please, stop confusing survival with living. You've spent a year in crisis mode, and crisis mode is necessary when you're under threat. But the threat's past, Vivian. If you stay in that defensive posture permanently, you're not protecting yourself. You're imprisoning yourself. The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Vivian had been thinking exactly this, but hearing it from someone else made it harder to dismiss. I don't know how to be any other way anymore. Every instinct I have is calibrated toward threat detection and elimination. I can't just turn that off. I'm not suggesting you turn it off. I'm suggesting you expand your range. Let yourself have human connections that aren't strategic alliances. Let yourself build something that matters beyond just corporate success. Let yourself be vulnerable occasionally without treating it like fatal weakness. Vivian wanted to argue but couldn't find the ground to stand on. Catherine was right. She'd become so focused on never being hurt again that she'd built a life where nothing could touch her, which meant nothing could reach her either. I wouldn't know where to start. Start small. Go on a date with someone who isn't calculating political advantage. Take a vacation without bringing security detail. Read a book that has nothing to do with business strategy. Remember that you're a person, not just a weapon system in designer suits. They finished lunch discussing lighter topics, art openings, social scandals that didn't involve them, gossip about mutual acquaintances. But Catherine's advice stayed with Vivian, settling into the spaces where constant vigilance had been living. The weeks that followed were strange and disorienting. Without immediate threats requiring response, Vivian found herself with time she didn't know how to fill. She threw herself into Blackthorn Holdings operations, restructuring company security and implementing protocols that would prevent future infiltration. But even that work felt hollow, solving yesterday's problems when new challenges hadn't emerged yet. Adrian was released from the hospital with instructions for extended recovery. He moved into a flat in Kensington, smaller than Blackthorn Manor, but adequate for someone no longer playing Duke at full capacity. They maintained professional distance, communicating through lawyers and assistants about final divorce details. The divorce was finalized on a gray January afternoon in a courthouse that smelled like institutional resignation. Vivian and Adrian sat across from each other, signing documents that officially ended what had been dead for months anyway. The judge pronounced their marriage dissolved with the same tone someone might use reading a grocery list. Outside, Adrian paused on the courthouse steps. I suppose congratulations are in order. You're free. We're both free. That was the point. He nodded, looking older than his 34 years. What will you do with your freedom? Build something that's actually mine, not borrowed authority from your title, not power extracted from partnership with weak men, just pure Vivian Ashford empire building. That's terrifying. I almost pity whoever underestimates you next. Learn from your mistakes. Don't pity them. Vivian started down the steps, then paused. Adrian, thank you for the honesty about why you really married me. It was cruel but necessary. I needed to understand. Will you forgive me? The question hung in cold January air between them. Eventually. Maybe. Vivian considered him with the complicated mixture of anger and pity that characterized most of her feelings about their shared history. But forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. We're done, Adrian. Permanently. The only relationship we'll have going forward is professional cordiality when business requires it. I understand. He looked like he wanted to say more, but recognized futility. Be extraordinary, Vivian. Be the version of yourself I was too weak to deserve. She walked away without responding, leaving him on the courthouse steps with whatever regrets he'd earned.